Chapter 1525. Early the next morning, the sun had just risen. Ji Tianqing changed into a white robe with patterns of stars and clouds and a jade crown with the help of maids. After washing his face and rinsing his mouth, he walked out of the room and stood under the eaves of the door, observing the situation in the house. This was a yard in the depth of the palace. It was built in a magnificent manner and the environment was quiet and elegant. There were guards on all the roads and gates. There were more than a dozen young and beautiful maids in the hall. Lu Li is so sincere. Keeping me in the Hall of Tranquility is just the first step. He must have other plans and means. Ji Tianqing thought to himself. A glint of coldness rose in his eyes. Right at that moment, a crisp and pleasant voice of a lady came from next to him. "Young Master Ji, how come you are in the mood to watch the sunrise so early in the morning?" Hearing the voice, Ji Tianqing turned to the right. He saw a slim and graceful figure in a white dress standing under the eaves of the corridor. It was a young lady of about 20 years old. She was pure and beautiful. Her eyebrows were like mountains and her eyes were as clear as water. She was wearing a simple but elegant white dress and a pair of hairpins. She was dignified and graceful. She was a rare beauty. Ji Tianqing recognized her at once. She was the #1 genius of the Empire of Thousand Snow, Jiang Ningxue. Ji Tianqing was surprised. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Jiang Ningxue? What are you doing here?" Jiang Ningxue put on a gentle smile. She walked to him and said in a gentle voice, "Young Master Ji, have you forgotten? I am a citizen of the Empire of Thousand Snow. Now that the Crown Prince has come to the Mount of Gods to pay his respects, I must come to pay my respects to him. Before the Crown Prince leaves the Mount of Gods, I will stay in the Hall of Tranquility for a few days. Coincidentally, my room is right next to young Master Ji's. Perhaps, this is fate? Fate?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, "Maybe." He thought to himself, only a fool would believe this is fate. Last night, Lu Li said he wanted to set me up with Jiang Ningxue. This morning, Jiang Ningxue showed up in the room next to mine. How could Lu Li be so obvious? Jiang Ningxue noticed that he seemed to be lost in thought, so she took the initiative to say, "Young Master Ji, this is the first time we've come to Mount God Bestowment. We haven't walked around since we arrived. If young Master Ji doesn't mind, would young Master Ji accompany me for a stroll around the palace and enjoy the scenery?" As if she was afraid that Ji Tianqing would misunderstand, she added, "Early on during the worship ceremony, I paid close attention to you and was curious about you. Now that I finally have the opportunity to come into contact with you, it is my honor to be able to talk to you face to face. How can I refuse a beauty's invitation? Wouldn't it spoil the scenery?" Ji Tianqing nodded calmly and agreed to her request. Thus, the two of them walked side by side, casually strolling around the palace, chatting as they walked. Jiang Ningxue's appearance and temperament were outstanding. She also had a faint natural fragrance. Her breath smelled like orchids when she spoke. She and Ji Tianqing were close to each other, as if they were a couple who had fallen in love with each other. Her faint fragrance kept teasing Ji Tianqing's heart. If he were an ordinary young man, he would have been tempted by her. Even if he didn't take advantage of her, he would keep glancing at her curvaceous and graceful figure. However, Ji Tianqing remained calm and his eyes were clear. There was not a trace of distracting thoughts in his mind. Soon, 2 hours passed. Ji Tianqing and Jiang Ningxue walked around the Temple of Tranquility. They admired the 2 gardens and the crystal lake before returning to their residence. Ji Tianqing found some clues after spending 2 hours with her. While he was thinking, Jiang Ningxue also remained silent. She seemed to be absent-minded as if she had something on her mind. Based on Jiang Ningxue's expressions, reactions and some of her actions, Lu Li could tell that Jiang Ningxue was trying to please him, but in fact, she was resisting him. He immediately understood that Jiang Ningxue didn't want to please him, but she had to compromise because of Lu Li's order. Also, Jiang Ningxue was a dignified and graceful lady, unlike Lu Li who was cunning and couldn't hide his thoughts and secrets. Understanding this, Ji Tianqing decided to find a chance to test Jiang Ningxue further. The two of them returned to their residence and sat down to rest under a 1,000-year-old pine. The maids had already placed all kinds of fruits, pastries and tea on the stone table under the tree for them to enjoy. Jiang Ningxue sat in a dignified posture, holding a teacup and drinking tea. Ji Tianqing frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he had an idea. He looked at Jiang Ningxue and said with a smile, "Lady Jiang, among the geniuses of the 6 states, you are one of the top 3. I admire you very much. Recently, when I was cultivating my swordsmanship, I encountered some bottlenecks and questions that I couldn't solve. Lady Jiang, please help me to see what is wrong with my swordsmanship and how I can break through the bottleneck." With that said, he took out a black sword from his interspatial ring before waiting for Jiang Ningxue's answer or not. This 1-meter-long black sword had an exquisite and gorgeous design. A lifelike black dragon was coiled around the hilt. The sword was emitting a sharp coldness. Clearly, it was a rare relic weapon in the world. After all, this was the black dragon sword that the little black dragon had transformed into. Ji Tianqing had just communicated with the little black dragon with his spiritual power and confirmed his plan. Holding the black dragon sword, he stood up and walked to the center of the yard, ready to display his swordsmanship. Jiang Ningxue, who had been absent-minded, suddenly saw the black dragon sword in his hand. She was refreshed and her eyes glowed. She tried her best to suppress the excitement in her heart. She pretended to be calm as she looked at Ji Tianqing and asked, "Young Master Ji, the sword in your hand is no ordinary item. It must be a peerless relic, right?" Jiang Ningxue's reaction made Ji Tianqing laugh inwardly. He was even more certain of his guess. He nodded at Jiang Ningxue and said with a proud expression, "Of course. If you want to become an expert in the way of the sword, you must have an extraordinary sword. And this sword in my hand is a divine weapon that is 1 in a million." Jiang Ningxue saw his proud expression and became even more anxious. She stared at the black dragon sword, almost unable to move her eyes away. "Young Master Ji, since this sword is so extraordinary, it must have a famous name, right?" Hearing this question, Ji Tianqing immediately frowned. He nodded with a strange expression and said, "Of course it has a name, but it's not famous. It's a little strange. This sword is called Burial of Heaven. This name is a little, sigh." When he said this, the voice of the Burial of Heaven suddenly sounded in his mind. It said with some displeasure, "Even if you want to put on an act, don't slander me, alright?" Ji Tianqing hurriedly transmitted his voice to persuade it, "Burial of Heaven. You just need to sleep and recuperate. Don't worry about these trivial matters." Chapter 1526. When Jiang Ningxue heard the words Burial of Heaven, her eyes lit up and her heart skipped a beat. Fortunately, she was calm and smart enough to not show any abnormalities on her face. Her expression was as calm as ever. However, Ji Tianqing was testing her on purpose. He had been observing the changes in her expression the whole time. Of course, he could tell that her emotions were surging and she was quite excited. Jiang Ningxue pretended to be confused and thought for a moment, then said, "Burial of Heaven? This name is a little strange, but it's very domineering. Young Master Ji, can you let me take a look at your Burial of Heaven?" On the surface, it seemed that she had never heard of the Burial of Heaven and was just curious. Ji Tianqing did not hesitate and handed the sword to her without hesitation. She quickly took it and held the black dragon sword with both hands. Her eyes were bright as she carefully observed it. She could tell that this sword was not only exquisite, but also contained a sense of antiquity. especially the black dragon on the hilt. It was very lifelike, as if it was about to come to life. Most importantly, this sword was not an ordinary magic weapon. It was not a lifeless object. It actually had a soul and divine energy. It was like a sleeping divine dragon that could come to life at any time to tear the sky apart and soar through the 9 heavens. This feeling made Jiang Ningxue very certain that this was an extraordinary divine sword. It was very similar to the legendary Burial of Heaven. After a while, Jiang Ningxue was still holding the black dragon sword. She turned it over and over again, admiring it very much. Ji Tianqing saw that she was looking at it for a long time without saying anything, and had no intention of returning it. He asked, "Miss Jiang, what's wrong?" Jiang Ningxue finally came back to her senses. She smiled awkwardly and explained, "Young Master Ji's Burial of Heaven is indeed a peerless divine weapon. In all my life, I have never seen such a spiritual and extraordinary divine sword. I was so shocked that I lost my composure for a moment. I have made a fool of myself in front of young Master Ji." Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. He said in a playful tone, "Since Miss Jiang likes this divine sword so much, I will reluctantly part with it and give it to you. What do you think?" Jiang Ningxue's body trembled. Her face was filled with joy as she stared at Ji Tianqing with sparkling eyes. She asked, "Young Master Ji, are you really willing to give me such a godly sword?" Ji Tianqing's smile became more and more playful. He nodded and said, "Of course I'm willing to part with a beauty like Miss Jiang, but I have a condition." Jiang Ningxue was too focused on obtaining the sword of Burial of Heaven to notice the teasing look in his eyes. She quickly asked, "What are your conditions, Mr. Ji?" "There's no harm in speaking." "Really?" Ji Tianqing looked at her with a smile and walked to her side. He leaned over and whispered in her ear. Hearing his conditions, Jiang Ningxue's delicate body trembled. Her body froze on the spot. When she came back to her senses, her face was red with embarrassment. Even her fair neck was covered in a layer of red. Her body was also trembling. She lowered her head, not daring to look Ji Tianqing in the eyes. She stood up with a flustered expression and quickly returned the sword of Burial of Heaven to Ji Tianqing. She then turned around and left in embarrassment and anger. Ji Tianqing looked at her back as she left in a hurry. The smile on his face became more and more playful. He asked in a loud voice, "Miss Jiang, do you agree or not? If you've made up your mind, come to my room tonight. We'll have a good talk again." Jiang Ningxue staggered and almost crashed into a pillar. The maids and guards around the courtyard all looked at her strangely when they heard Ji Tianqing's voice. She was instantly overwhelmed with shame and anger. She quickened her steps and ran through the corridor, leaving the courtyard as if she was escaping. After she left, Ji Tianqing put away the evil smile on his face, and his eyes regained their clarity and calmness. Since you are not a treacherous and fickle woman, why did you try to test me for Lu Li? I only tested you a little bit and you showed your true colors. Lu Li's honey trap seems to have collapsed by itself." Ji Tianqing put on a smile. After he went back to his room, he thought of another key issue. "When I went to the foot of the mountain to receive tributes, 2 envoys of the White Knight Empire attacked me first. I injured them and they ran away. Then, 2 masked men in black showed up. They also wanted to take the sword of Burial of Heaven. Not long after that, Lu Li came to the Mount of Gods to pay his respects. He even asked the chief guardian to transfer me to the Hall of Tranquility. Lu Li tried his best to win me over. He even resorted to honey traps to let Jiang Ningxue get close to me to show his goodwill. Lu Li must be after the Heaven's Burial sword since he was willing to pay so much for it. Are the 2 masked men in black from the Empire of Thousand Snow? Previously, he had been wondering if the 2 groups of men who attacked him were from the Empire of White Knight. Now that Lu Li was trying so hard to please him, he understood that the second group of men in black might be from the Empire of Thousand Snow. On this thought, Ji Tianqing told himself that no matter what Lu Li was up to, he must be careful. It was late at night again. In a study room in the Hall of Tranquility, Lu Li was sitting in front of a desk. Jiang Ningxue in a white dress was sitting in front of him. She was reporting to him calmly. Lu Li, today, I approached Ji Tianqing on my own initiative. I spent half a day with him and I have found some clues. Hearing this, Lu Li was delighted. He asked at once, Shuer, what did you find? Jiang Ningxue said with relief, I have gained his trust. Recently, he has reached a bottleneck in his cultivation of swordsmanship. He wanted to practice swordsmanship and asked me to give him some guidance. He took out a black sword called the Burial of Heaven. I have observed it carefully. There should be no mistake. Lu Li's eyes glowed. He became excited and eager. Are you sure that is the Burial of Heaven? That's great. As the saying goes, even heroes fall for the charms of beautiful women. It seems that the beauty trap is the most effective. Shuer, since Ji Tianqing is willing to show you the Burial of Heaven, it means that he has a good impression of you and trusts you. You must strike while the iron is hot and find a way to get the Burial of Heaven. Speaking of this, Jiang Ningxue's expression became weird. She said with resentment, that guy said that he is willing to give me the Burial of Heaven, but he has a condition. What condition? Lu Li asked in a hurry, did you agree? Jiang Ningxue's face was cold. A glint of coldness flashed through her eyes. She said angrily, that damn lecher, he wants me, to sleep with him for one night. Lu Li's expressions froze. He frowned with displeasure. But he thought to himself, damn that punk. He pretends to be a gentleman but he is such a pervert. Chapter 1527. Lu Li knew that Jiang Ningxue was deeply in love with him. Given Jiang Ningxue's status, family background, looks and talents, she was the best choice for him. However, compared to the best sword in the world, Jiang Ningxue was not so important. In his mind, how could a beautiful woman be more important than his future in martial arts? Jiang Ningxue saw that he was silent, as if he was considering something. She immediately became anxious, and the anger on her face became even more apparent. Lu Li, what are you thinking? Do you want me to agree to his rude terms? Jiang Ningxue thought that Lu Li would be as angry as she was and refuse the terms. However, Lu Li's reaction was as if he was weighing the pros and cons, considering whether to say yes or not. This made Jiang Ningxue feel even more indignant and disappointed. Her clear eyes were gradually covered with a layer of mist. Lu Li came back to his senses. He glanced at her and thought to himself, the Burial of Heaven is the best sword in the world. Ji Tianqing is neither a fool nor a lecher. How can he give away the Burial of Heaven so easily? Is he plotting something? Or does he not understand the value and significance of the Burial of Heaven? Lu Li looked at Jiang Ningxue and comforted her, Shuer, don't worry. There are still many suspicious points. The black sword that Ji Tianqing took out, he said it was the sword of the Burial of Heaven. Tell me, what is that sword like? Jiang Ningxue paused for a moment and thought of a possibility. She answered honestly, that sword is 1 meter long and 2 inches wide. It is pitch black and cold. There is a lifelike black dragon carved on the hilt. I have examined the sword carefully. It has a soul and strong fluctuation of divine energy. It is not an ordinary sword. After Lu Li heard this, he frowned. That sword is intact? There is a black dragon carved on the hilt? Yes. Jiang Ningxue nodded. Lu Li's expression changed. A cold glare flashed across his eyes. Shuer, you have been fooled by Ji Tianqing. That is not the sword of Burial of Heaven. The real Sword of Burial of Heaven had been severely damaged when Kenshin fell, and was now incomplete. With Ji Tianqing's strength, it was impossible for him to completely repair the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Furthermore, the hilt of the Burial of Heaven doesn't have a black dragon engraved on it. Jiang Ningxue was trembling with anger. Her face turned pale as she felt even more ashamed and furious. Damned lecher, you despicable bastard. He actually used a fake sword to impersonate the Sword of the Burial of Heaven and tried to cheat me of my innocence? Lu Li waved his hand and comforted her. Shuer, don't be so angry. It hasn't happened yet. Jiang Ningxue finally suppressed her hatred and anger. She frowned and asked, if that is not the Sword of the Burial of Heaven, why would Ji Tianqing use a fake sword to trick me? Coldness surged in Lu Li's eyes as he said coldly, clearly, Ji Tianqing has become suspicious. He deliberately used a fake sword to impersonate the Sword of the Burial of Heaven to test your reaction. Judging from all the signs, that guy is not simple. He must know the value and significance of the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. He has become suspicious of our motives. Jiang Ningxue appeared to be worried. She asked, then what should we do? Should I continue to get close to him? Lu Li thought about it and said calmly, of course, you have to stay in the Hall of Tranquility and continue to live next door to him. But you don't have to take the initiative to get close to him. Just let nature take its course. Even though he has become suspicious and we cannot get the Sword of the Burial of Heaven for now, I still have a follow-up plan. I will take this opportunity to drive a wedge between him and the Empire of Chu Yun. I will try my best to rope him into the Empire of Thousand Snow. If my plan works and he can leave the Mount of Gods, then his life will no longer be in his hands. The Sword of the Burial of Heaven will be mine. Hearing this, Jiang Ningxue understood what he meant. Lu Li could not take the Sword of the Burial of Heaven by force on the Mount of Gods. Once Ji Tianqing left the Mount of Gods, Lu Li would not have to hide anymore. He could do whatever he wanted. Then, the two discussed some more matters and decided on their next plan. After about 7 minutes, Jiang Ningxue said goodbye to Lu Li and left the study. 3 days passed before they knew it. During the 3 days, Ji Tianqing had been cultivating in the yard of the Hall of Tranquility. Just as he expected, Jiang Ningxue still lived in the room next to his, but she never came to see him again. Sometimes, when they saw each other, Jiang Ningxue would turn around and leave with a cold face. Anger could be seen between her eyebrows. Ji Tianqing was not surprised by this outcome at all. After all, Jiang Ningxue was a beauty with both talent and beauty. She was not a scheming beauty. Of course, she would not throw herself at Lu Li for a sword. Geniuses had their dignity and pride. However, compared to the quietness of the Hall of Tranquility, the palace where the geniuses of the 6 states lived was bustling with noise and excitement. It was unknown who spread the news, but it spread among the geniuses of the 6 nations. Now, everyone knew that Ji Tianqing had turned to Lu Li, the crown prince of the Empire of Thousand Snow. He was living in the Hall of Tranquility. Lu Li was once a disciple of a god and was highly regarded by the 2 guardians and several envoys. Every few years, Lu Li would go back to the Mount of Gods to pay his respects. He respected his teacher and was very sincere to the immortal master. The geniuses of the various states were talking about how Ji Tianqing could be appreciated and valued by Lu Li. It was like a silver lining at the end of the tunnel. Even if he could not become a disciple of a god in the future, he could be cultivated by Lu Li and he could do well in the Empire of Thousand Snow. More than a dozen geniuses of the Chu Yun Empire were angry and contemptuous about Ji Tianqing turning to Lu Li. As far as they were concerned, Ji Tianqing was the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire. He had disgraced himself by ruining the worship ceremony. Now, he had turned to the crown prince of the Empire of Thousand Snow. How shameless! He had disgraced the Chu Yun Empire. If it were not for the fact that it was inconvenient for them to go to the Hall of Tranquility, they would have reprimanded Ji Tianqing in person. Apart from this, some insiders said that Lu Li had begged the chief guardian to give Ji Tianqing another chance. When the 7 days were up, Lu Li would bring Ji Tianqing with him when he went to the temple to pay his respects. As long as Ji Tianqing bowed to the temple devoutly and repented sincerely, the anger of the chief guardian could be appeased. By that time, Lu Li could put in a good word for Ji Tianqing to the chief guardian. Maybe he could be exempted from punishment. When the geniuses of various states learned about this, they were all criticizing secretly. They were waiting for Lu Li to go to the temple to pay his respects so that they could see Lu Li and Ji Tianqing with their own eyes. Soon, the 7 days were up. Today was the day Lu Li would go to the temple to pay his respects. Early in the morning, the maids and guards in the Hall of Tranquility were busy. There was a hubbub of voices. Chapter 1528. In the Hall of Tranquility. In the spacious yard, more than 40 guards and maids were lined up in neat rows, looking solemn and dignified. They were all elites selected from the honor guard, qualified to accompany Lu Li to the temple to worship the immortal Lord. In addition, Jiang Ningxue and several geniuses of the Thousand Snow Empire were standing in front of the team. Everyone stood in the yard, waiting quietly. Lu Li was not present. At the moment, he was leading Chief Steward Fang to the yard where Ji Tianqing lived. Arriving at the yard, Lu Li stood under the ancient pine in the yard and waited. Chief Steward Fang walked to Ji Tianqing's room and shouted respectfully, "Young Master Ji, the time is up. You should go to the temple with the Crown Prince." The door was still closed. Ji Tianqing's voice came from inside. "Crown Prince Lu is going to worship the immortal Lord. As a sinner, I will not join in the fun in case there is another disturbance." Hearing this, both Chief Steward Fang and Lu Li frowned. Lu Li waved his hand to signal Chief Steward Fang to leave. He said in person, "Young Master Ji, what do you mean? Didn't we agree on this before? Now that the time is up, you don't want to go. Are you trying to embarrass me on purpose?" As soon as he finished speaking, the door creaked open. Ji Tianqing stepped out and looked at Lu Li with a playful smile. He explained, "Crown Prince Lu, you have misunderstood. Since I have promised you, I will not go back on my words. I am just reminding Crown Prince Lu that it is best to think carefully before you make a decision, in case there is another accident." He and Lu Li both knew that today's matter would attract the attention and discussion of the geniuses of the 6 states. It was inevitable that something would go wrong. Lu Li was stunned. He smiled and said, "As long as young Master Ji is sincere in repentance, what accident can happen? Also, since I dared to invite young Master Ji to worship in the temple, I have thought it through." Sincere in repentance? Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and a playful smile appeared on his face. Others might not know, but he knew very well that he did not do anything wrong. Why should he go to the temple to repent? He had never done anything wrong, so how could he repent and turn over a new leaf? The reason why he agreed to go to the temple with Lu Li to worship the immortal master was that he had other intentions. Ever since the great changes in the world and the incident of the divine thunder, he had been harboring many doubts in his heart. He pondered for a long time, but he still couldn't figure it out. Why did the scene of Kenshin and martial god Taihao sparring appear in his soul when he entered the temple and saw the statue of divine Lord Taihao? Why did the great guardian tie him to the stone pillar and whip him? Why did the entire Mount of Gods shake and even thunder strike him? Was it because of the sword of burial of heaven, or because he looked like Kenshin? Or was it because of the Kenshin tomb in his body? He had always wanted to figure out the relationship between him and the Kenshin. He wanted to go to the temple again to see if there would be another great change in the world. Would the statue of divine Lord Taihao be worthy of his worship? With so many questions in mind, Ji Tianqing followed Lu Li out of the yard and into the front yard. Lu Li was at the front of the group, followed by Ji Tianqing, Jiang Ningxue and Chief Steward Fang. Behind them were the maids and guards. They walked out of the Hall of Tranquility in a formidable array and walked toward the temple under the Tower of Clear Heaven. The sun had just risen. The faint golden sunlight shone on the peak of the Mount of Gods, illuminating all the buildings. The sea of clouds around the peak was also suffused with a golden glow. It was an auspicious sight. For Lu Li, this was a good omen, which made him feel relaxed and happy. Soon, they arrived at the plaza outside the temple. This spacious plaza was destroyed by the great changes in the world and the divine thunder, turning into a pile of ruins. Later, the powerful warriors and craftsmen of the Tower of Clear Heaven restored the plaza to its original state in just one day. At the moment, more than 100 young talents of the 6 states were gathered in the plaza. Seeing Lu Li and the others walking over, many of them looked up and sized up Lu Li, Ji Tianqing and the others with mixed feelings. Most people's gazes were focused on Ji Tianqing. They wanted to see what this guy looked like after all the troubles he had caused. The geniuses of the Outcloud Empire also stared at Ji Tianqing with disdain and anger. They whispered to each other. Lu Li ignored the onlookers. He led the group through the plaza and was about to enter the temple. The chief guardian and the 6 messengers had been waiting in the temple for a long time. As soon as he arrived, the ceremony could be held and the worship could begin. However, when the team was about to cross the plaza, more than a dozen young geniuses stood in front of the team, blocking their way. These young geniuses were all from the Outcloud Empire. Their leaders were Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long. Lu Li stopped at once. He frowned and asked in a deep voice, "What are you doing?" As the representative of the Outcloud Empire, Lan Yiqing stepped forward, cupped his fists to Lu Li and explained, "Prince Lu, we do not mean to offend you and we will not stop you from worshipping the immortal Lord. However, there is a shameless traitor in the Outcloud Empire who has disgraced our nation. As citizens of the Outcloud Empire, we cannot sit by and do nothing. We must stop this traitor and make him give a reasonable explanation." Lan Yiqing's cold words spread throughout the square. The scene instantly quieted down, and the atmosphere became somewhat heavy and tense. The young talents from the other states quickly retreated to the sides of the plaza, waiting to see a good show. They all knew that the traitor Lan Yiqing mentioned was Ji Tianqing. The geniuses of the Outcloud Empire were going to make things difficult for Ji Tianqing. Everyone was looking at Ji Tianqing with interest, waiting to see how he would explain and how he could resolve the situation. Lu Li was trying his best to win over Ji Tianqing to sow discord between Ji Tianqing and the Outcloud Empire. The news that the geniuses of other states learned was released by Lu Li on purpose. Now, Lan Yiqing and the others showed up to stop Lu Li, which was within Lu Li's expectation. Lu Li thought to himself, "The plan is going well. Everything is going according to my plan. Now that the Outcloud Empire is making things difficult in public, it is a good chance for me to win over Ji Tianqing." On this thought, Lu Li looked at Lan Yiqing coldly and sneered, "Ha, ha. Lady Lan, you can eat whatever you want but you can't say whatever you want. People around me are my friends and citizens of the Thousand Snow Empire. How can I be a traitor?" Lan Yiqing didn't argue with him. She stared at Ji Tianqing coldly and shouted with contempt, "Ji Tianqing, you have the guts to betray the Outcloud Empire but you don't have the guts to admit it?" Chapter 1529. Lan Yiqing's attitude was tough and her words were harsh. She was smart enough to not argue with Lu Li. That would be a waste of time. She directly called out Ji Tianqing. She would not offend Lu Li too much and at the same time, she could put Ji Tianqing in a passive and awkward situation. As long as Ji Tianqing still had his dignity and character, he would not turn a deaf ear to it. He would step forward bravely. Young talents from different countries were looking at Lan Yiqing with new eyes. They had different opinions about her. This girl is so scheming. Ji Tianqing is going to be embarrassed. This Lan Yiqing is calm and wise. Her means are sharp. She has pointed out the core of the problem. No wonder after Ji Tianqing was punished, she has become the role model of the Chu Yun Empire. We cannot underestimate this girl. We must be careful of her in the future. Lan Yiqing couldn't help but sneer when she saw that people were whispering and pointing at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing, do you think you can turn over a new leaf just because you have Lu Li as your backer? Don't even think about it. I will not let you go to the temple to repent and turn over a new leaf. If you take this chance to please the chief guardian and avoid punishment, you will become my stumbling block in the future. Beside her, Kuang Long and the more than a dozen young talents sneered as well. They looked at Ji Tianqing with contempt. For a moment, Ji Tianqing became the focus of attention. He was pushed to the teeth of the storm. But he had expected that Lan Yiqing and the others would stir up trouble, so he was prepared. He walked out of the crowd calmly and stood in front of Lan Yiqing with a sneer of disdain. I don't belong to any force. How can I betray you? You should keep the word traitor to yourself. Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long's expressions changed. They frowned and the contempt on their faces grew. What a shameless guy. Lan Yiqing scolded coldly, Ji Tianqing, don't forget that you are the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire. Now, you've sided with the crown prince of the Thousand Snow Empire. If this isn't betrayal, then what is? Ji Tianqing also frowned and said contemptuously, Lan Yiqing, are you deaf, or are you out of your mind? I've already made myself clear. Do you still not understand? Although I came to the vast heaven pagoda with the identity of the Outcloud Empire's #1 genius, I'm not a member of the Outcloud Empire. Who I want to be with is my personal matter. What does it have to do with you? Yi Qingtang thought. Who the hell are you? Are you qualified to tell me what to do? The cold and majestic voice spread throughout the entire square. The geniuses from various countries were all shocked as they looked at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. No one would have thought that he would say such arrogant words, and even scold Lan Yiqing so badly. Lan Yiqing was so angry that she glared at him. She pointed at him and said, "You," 3 times, but could not find a word to refute. Kuang Long and the other young geniuses were also furious. They looked at Ji Tianqing as if they were going to spit fire. However, like Lan Yiqing, they had seen Ji Tianqing participate in the ranking battle with their own eyes. At that time, Ji Tianqing's style of dress was completely different from the people of the Chu Yun Empire. Even his speech and accent were very awkward. Everyone knew that Ji Tianqing was indeed not a member of the Chu Yun Empire. However, Lan Yiqing was furious. She had not achieved her goal, so how could she back down? She pointed at Ji Tianqing and shouted coldly, Ji Tianqing, if it weren't for the special care of Saint Emperor Chu Yun, how could you become the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire? Now that you want to join the Qianqiu Empire, how could you say such heartless words? Saint Emperor Chu Yun will not let you go. Kuang Long and the other young geniuses nodded in agreement while cursing furiously. Ji Tianqing stared at Lan Yiqing coldly and scolded contemptuously, I became the #1 genius of the Chu Yun Empire because of my strength. I used my real strength to defeat all of you trash, not because of anyone's special care. As for whether the great Emperor Chu Yun will let me go, what does that have to do with you? Who do you think you are to represent the great Emperor Chu Yun? I'm warning you one last time, don't tell me what to do. Take your claws away, or I don't mind crippling them. Such arrogant words made Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the other geniuses turn pale and tremble. He dared to say such arrogant words in front of the geniuses of the 6 countries. He was too arrogant. However, his aura was majestic, and his entire body emitted an incomparably domineering aura. Every word he spoke was like muffled thunder that fiercely shook the hearts of everyone present. Lan Yiqing was shocked and angry. He was so angry that he almost vomited blood. His face was livid. Ji Tianqing, you will definitely pay for what you've said today. She glared at Ji Tianqing with a face full of hatred. After leaving behind some harsh words, she turned around and left. She wanted to use today's opportunity to humiliate Ji Tianqing in public and stop him from going to the temple. She didn't expect things to turn out this way. Not only did her plan fail, but she was also scolded by Ji Tianqing in public. She was humiliated. The more she thought about it, the more ashamed she became. She was so angry that she spat out a mouthful of blood. Kuang Long and the other young geniuses quickly surrounded her and retreated to the edge of the square to comfort her. However, there was still one person standing in front of Lu Li and Ji Tianqing. He was in a white robe. Even though he was a man, he was as beautiful as a woman. His temperament was feminine and charming. Without a doubt, he was Yin Wu Quebec. Although he was also in the crowd just now, he didn't say anything from the beginning to the end, nor did he slander Ji Tianqing. At the moment, he was looking at Ji Tianqing with mixed feelings. He secretly sent a message, "Young Master Ji, I didn't expect that things would turn out this way. No matter what, I must remind you that Lu Li is a cunning and scheming man. He will do anything to achieve his goals. Even if you are in trouble, you should not follow him. He is not a wise leader." Ji Tianqing also looked at him with a deep gaze, sending him a message, "Thank you for your concern and reminder. I have my reasons and plans for doing this. Also, I don't belong to any force and I will not submit to anyone. Even if the Holy Emperor of Thousand Snow was here, he could not make me submit to him, let alone Lu Li." Hearing Lu Li's words, the worry in Yin Wu Kei's eyes disappeared. He nodded slightly to Ji Tianqing and transmitted his voice to him, "I didn't misjudge you. You are still arrogant and proud as always. However, I was born in the Chu Yun Empire. My family and friends are all in the Chu Yun Empire. Therefore, I am unable to stand up and support you. Please forgive me." Chapter 1530. Yin Wu Kei's eyes were clear as he stared at him. His lips curled into a smile. He and Ji Tianqing looked at each other for a while before Yin Wuk turned around and went back to the crowd. The disturbance caused by Lan Yiqing and the others was resolved by Ji Tianqing. His confidence and dominance left a deep impression on the talents from different countries. Once again, Yin Wuk had become the focus of discussion. Lu Li looked at Ji Tianqing and then at Lan Yiqing and the others at the edge of the plaza. A glint of disappointment and disdain rose in his eyes. He had thought that Lan Yiqing and the others could embarrass Ji Tianqing and put him in a humiliating position. By then, Lu Li would step in to solve the dispute and help Ji Tianqing out of the crisis. Lu Li was sure that he would be appreciated by Ji Tianqing. Little did he expect that Ji Tianqing could solve the problem with only a few words. He even made Lan Yiqing spit out blood and almost went on a rampage. Lu Li's plan had failed. He couldn't help but curse, "I am so disappointed in the Chu Yun Empire." Of course, Lu Li had to act as if nothing had happened. He led the others through the plaza and into the temple. At the gate of the temple, the more than 40 maids and escorts stayed outside and knelt in the corridor with respect. As servants, it was already a great honor for them to be able to come to the temple. They were not qualified to enter the hall. Only Ji Tianqing, Jiang Ningxue and several talents from the Empire of Thousand Snow followed Lu Li into the hall. In the splendid hall, Chief Guardian stood in front of the statue of the Immortal. The 6 messengers stood on both sides of the statue. Just like the previous ones, this worship ceremony was hosted by Chief Guardian. He held a book of laws in his hands and stood in front of the statue solemnly. He looked at Lu Li and the others with dignity. Lu Li led Ji Tianqing and the others to the center of the hall and bowed to the Chief Guardian and the messengers. "Greetings, Chief Guardian and messengers." Ji Tianqing didn't react. He didn't bow or say anything. He looked at the wall behind the Divine Master statue, observing the murals and symbols. Meanwhile, he could not help but recall some scenes related to martial god Taihao deep in his mind. Those were Kenshin's memories, but they were scattered and fragmented. Fortunately, he didn't lose focus. His eyes were still clear and calm. Seeing that he did not bow, the great guardian was a little displeased, and his eyes turned cold. However, he suppressed the dissatisfaction in his heart and ignored Ji Tianqing. In his mind, Ji Tianqing's disrespect towards him was nothing, but disrespect towards Divine Lord Taihao was a heinous crime. He held the codex in his hands and announced in a solemn tone, "I declare that the worship ceremony will now begin." Then, with a solemn tone, he began to recite the profound and obscure divine scriptures. His right hand slowly waved as he performed a mysterious seal. Everything is born without a beginning, there is a beginning and there is an end. Nothing is wrong, nothing is thought. As the solemn voice of the chief guardian echoed in the hall, Lu Li dropped to his knees with respect and kowtowed to the statue. His expression and posture were full of reverence and devotion. After 3 kowtows, he stood up, took 3 steps forward, and kowtowed 3 more times. Then, he walked toward the Divine Master's statue step by step, kneeling every 3 steps and kowtowing every 9 steps. It was truly 3 kneels and 9 kowtows. Jiang Ningxue and the other geniuses of the Empire of Thousand Snow did the same. They knelt and kowtowed to the Divine Master's statue with utmost devotion. Only Ji Tianqing remained standing in the middle of the hall. He neither knelt nor kowtowed. His dignity and pride made it impossible for him to kowtow to the Divine Master's statue like Lu Li and the others. He only bowed to the Divine Master's statue. This was the greatest sincerity he could show. The chief guardian was still reciting the divine scriptures when he saw Ji Tianqing standing out from the crowd. Lu Li, Jiang Ningxue and the others were all on their knees, but he was the only one standing upright. He was too conspicuous. The chief protector immediately stopped chanting when he saw this. He furrowed his brows as anger surged through his eyes. He never expected that after what happened last time, Ji Tianqing would not learn his lesson. He even dared to offend the Divine Master's dignity. He gave Ji Tianqing a chance to turn over a new leaf for Lu Li's sake. He never expected that Ji Tianqing would still have such an attitude. How could he not be angry? Ji Tianqing, I have shown you mercy and given you a chance to come to the temple to worship and repent. How dare you not kneel? The chief guardian glared at Ji Tianqing and scolded him coldly. The messengers, Lu Li and the others were all startled. They all turned to Ji Tianqing. Everyone stared at him with shocked and puzzled expressions. Nobody could understand why this guy refused to repent. The statue enshrined in the temple was the supreme martial god Taihao. Was this guy stupid? Why wouldn't he kneel and worship the Divine Master's statue? If someone's attitude was pious, they might be able to gain the Divine Master's favor and receive the Divine Master's enlightenment and rewards. At this moment, a sudden cry of surprise broke the silence of the temple. Heavens! Everyone, look! The Divine Master's statue is showing an oracle. Hearing this, everyone was taken aback. Their eyes were dazed and they could not react in time. A moment later, everyone came to their senses and turned to look at the Divine Master's statue. The majestic and dignified Divine Master's statue lit up with a dazzling golden light. It was incomparably sacred. On the pedestal at the foot of the statue was a white jade slab, 2 meters wide and 10 meters long. It also lit up with a white light. This jade slab was part of the pedestal and was used for decoration and embellishment. At the same time, this jade slab was a piece of divine jade that could communicate with the Divine Master. It had a special function, which was to show the Divine Master's oracle. When a peerless expert or genius worshipped the Divine Master's statue, if they could gain the Divine Master's favor, the jade slab would light up and show different oracles. Some oracles were to enlighten believers. Some oracles were to give orders. For nearly 1,000 years, only a few people received oracles when they worshipped the Divine Master's statue. Those few people were the saint emperors of several large empires and the great protector of the past. Back then, the great protector was also a peerless genius of his generation. With his abyss body, his name shook the world. When he worshipped the Divine Master's statue, he gained the Divine Master's favor and triggered an oracle. Later, he was nurtured into a warrior saint expert and was highly regarded by the Divine Master. He was appointed as the great protector of the clear heaven pagoda. Now, the oracle had come again. The great protector, the 6 messengers, Lu Li, Jiang Ningxue, and the others all showed excited expressions. Lu Li, in particular, was so excited that his face was flushed. He hurriedly kowtowed 9 times to the Divine Master's statue and laughed excitedly. Chapter 1531. Everyone understood that a person that could trigger an oracle must have received the Master of God's favor and attention. Such a person would either be a powerful warrior like the 6 holy emperors or a peerless genius that could become a powerful warrior of the holy emperor level in the future. Today was the day that Lu Li paid homage to the Master of God. Not only was Lu Li devoted to the Master of God, but he was also a gifted warrior. Almost everyone was convinced that the oracle was given to Lu Li by the Master of God. The several messengers were looking at Lu Li with gratification and applauding him. This is great. Lu Li's devotion has moved the Master of God. For decades, we have seen with our own eyes that Lu Li would come back to pay homage to the Master of God every 2 years to thank the Master of God for his cultivation. He deserves it. When Lu Li was still an apprentice, we all thought highly of him and believed that he would achieve great things in the future. It seems that we are right. Right. The Master of God has given us an oracle. This is his acknowledgement of Lu Li. Chief Guardian was so happy that he even forgot about Ji Tianqing's disrespect to the Master of God. Looking at Lu Li with glowing eyes, Chief Guardian exclaimed, "Lu Li, I have always seen your talent and your devotion to the Master of God and I approve of it. Now, you have finally won the Master of God's favor and the oracle is here. You have achieved something. I am happy for you and I am proud of you." Lu Li had become the center of attention. Being praised by the Chief Guardian and several messengers, he was so excited that his heart was pounding. He had been waiting for this day for hundreds of years. In order to win the Master of God's favor, he had done everything he could. Now, his wish had finally come true. He was so happy and excited that he almost jumped to his feet. That being said, he tried his best to suppress his excitement. He remained humble and courteous. He bowed to the Chief Guardian and the messengers and expressed his gratitude in a dignified manner. Jiang Ningxue and the other geniuses of the Empire of Thousand Snow were looking at Lu Li with admiration and admiration. For them, this was a dream that was out of their reach. They were excited and proud that Lu Li had been acknowledged by the Master of God. However, right when everyone was filled with excitement and revelry, a voice that was filled with bewilderment resounded once more in the hall. Why is the Divine Master's oracle a little strange? The hall instantly quieted down. Everyone stopped smiling and turned to look at Lin Daoyi. He was the first one to notice the arrival of the oracle. Now, it was him again. After carefully examining the oracle, he asked this question. Everyone looked at the jade slab at the base of the statue. On the white jade slab, there were 2 lines of golden words. When I first entered the conferred God's land, I was struck by lightning from the 9 heavens. When the day comes, I'll break the secrets of heaven with a single sword. The years passed without a trace, the affairs of the world reincarnated into another epoch. Even now, I still think of the 9 heavens beyond, destroying the Milky Way and breaking spacetime with my palm. Previously, when everyone saw the white light flickering on the jade board, they only knew that the Divine Lord's oracle had arrived. Because of this, they cheered and jumped for joy. No one carefully read the contents of the oracle. Now, they stared at the 2 lines of words. After reading it 2 or 3 times, they all frowned in confusion. Not only did the chief guardian and the 6 emissaries find it strange, but even Jiang Ningxue and the several geniuses of the Empire of Thousand Snow were suspicious. They secretly observed Lu Li's expression. Lu Li stared at the 2 lines of golden words. The excitement and ecstasy in his heart disappeared without a trace. He was filled with confusion, disappointment, and unwillingness. He pressed his lips together and said nothing. Anyone could see that the first sentence of the oracle excluded Lu Li from the list. When he first entered the conferred God's land, he was struck by lightning from the 9 heavens. This clearly meant that the one favored by the Divine Lord had just entered the Mount of Conferred Gods and he had attracted lightning from the 9 heavens. When the day comes, I'll break the secrets of heaven with a single sword. This implied that the Divine Lord thought highly of this person. This person was talented and had unlimited potential. In the future, he would become a powerful warrior who could break the secrets of heaven with a single sword. As for the second paragraph, no one could understand it. For example, the words, time of ages, reincarnation after reincarnation, beyond the 9 heavens, destroy galaxies, and break time and space, were even more confusing. The Divine Lord's oracle was strange. No one knew who it was referring to. The chief guardian, the 6 emissaries, Lu Li and the others were all silent. They frowned and discussed in confusion. Ji Tianqing was the only one in the hall. After a moment of thought, he put on a smile. He put his hands behind his back and stared at the statue of the Divine Lord with glowing eyes. He murmured to himself, it seems that the changes in heaven and earth and the thunderbolts were not coincidences. Martial God Taihao has sensed my existence and he thinks that I am Kenshin. That is why he sent down this oracle. Time of ages left no trace. Reincarnation after reincarnation. Even now, he still thinks about beyond the 9 heavens, destroying galaxies and breaking time and space. Martial God Taihao is talking about Kenshin, isn't he? Or perhaps, he intentionally said these words in order to test if I'm the reincarnation of the Sword God. Thinking of this, he finally understood the reason for the disturbance. The smile on his face grew wider. The chief guardian and the 6 emissaries were discussing telepathically, trying to figure out the meaning of the oracle. Suddenly, he glanced at Ji Tianqing. Seeing Ji Tianqing's smiling face, the chief guardian frowned and shouted, Ji Tianqing. What are you laughing at? This is a sacred temple. How dare you be disrespectful to the Divine Lord? The cold and angry shout interrupted everyone's thoughts. Everyone's gazes gathered on Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing did not restrain himself. Instead, the smile on his face grew wider. He said in a playful tone, I am laughing at someone who thinks he is infallible and misinterprets the Divine Lord's oracle. Making such a joke is disrespectful to the Divine Lord, isn't it? The chief guardian was rendered speechless. His old face turned red. But he maintained his dignified look and shouted, the Divine Lord's oracle is of course unfathomable and contains heaven's secrets. It is normal that mortals like us cannot understand it. How can it be a joke? Ji Tianqing stared at him and said with a smile, everyone is cheering and celebrating before they can see the oracle clearly. What is this if not a joke? The chief guardian and the emissaries blushed at the sarcasm. They were embarrassed and ashamed. Lu Li, Jiang Ningxue and the others were so ashamed that they wished they could find a hole to hide in. Seeing that the chief guardian was speechless, Ji Tianqing continued, is the oracle really that hard to understand? I don't think so. Just entering the apotheosized land and being struck by lightning. Ha, ha. He sneered and glanced at the chief guardian and the emissaries. Then, he turned around and walked out of the hall. Everyone looked at his back and suddenly thought of something. Their expressions changed drastically. Lin Daoi exclaimed in disbelief, "I understand now. The oracle is talking about Ji Tianqing." Chapter 1532. Even if Lin Daoi did not remind, the majority of the people present also guessed the answer. That divine master's oracle was absolutely not bestowed to Lu Li. It was talking about precisely Ji Tianqing. After all, there was a sentence in the oracle: "First enter God's sealing mountain, be struck by divine lightning of the 9 heavens." Looking at the past 1,000 years, only Ji Tianqing alone could cause such a commotion. It was just that everyone subconsciously believed that Ji Tianqing had offended the divine master's majesty before. He was still a sinner right now, how could he possibly obtain the divine master's oracle? When the oracle descended, everyone's first reaction was Lu Li and would not consider Ji Tianqing at all. This was simply too preposterous. But the oracle still appeared clearly on the jade tablet. Who dared to question the divine master's oracle? The expressions of the chief protector and the few divine envoys all became very complicated. Before this, they did not take Ji Tianqing seriously and even somewhat loathed and hated him. In terms of strength, this guy could not rank in the top 5. In terms of talent, this guy was also very ordinary. Yet, this guy was arrogant and conceited, triggering a huge change in heaven and earth, causing God's sealing mountain to tremble and nearly causing a catastrophe. If not for Jiao coming forward to protect him, the chief protector would have long expelled him from the vast heaven pagoda. But now, this guy just bowed to the divine master's statue and obtained the divine master's favor, even showing the oracle. This was simply too inconceivable, too dreamy. The few divine envoys stared at the oracle and were still whispering to each other, discussing the meaning of the oracle. But the chief protector frowned, all sorts of thoughts currently flashing through his mind. No wonder His Highness Jiao would protect Ji Tianqing. It must be that His Highness saw through this boy's extraordinariness long ago and will obtain the divine master's favor. Previously, this seat was still planning to find a chance to expel him from God's sealing mountain in the future, to prevent him from wreaking havoc in the Holy Land again. But I didn't expect that he obtained the divine master's attention and favor. Looks like not only can this seat not expel him, but I also have to value and groom him even more. Sigh. Thinking up to here, the chief protector sighed heavily in his heart, only feeling very vexed. Ji Tianqing was arrogant and did not put him in his eyes at all. However, he had to follow the divine lord's orders and try his best to cultivate Ji Tianqing. How could he not feel aggrieved? Lu Li's face was clouded with anger and shame. He secretly clenched his fists, and his eyes were filled with intense anger. Originally, today was his most glorious day. If it wasn't for Ji Tianqing, he would have been one of the lucky few who could obtain the oracle. His future achievements and status wouldn't be any worse than the 6 great holy emperors. But now, all the glory belonged to Ji Tianqing. He had become a complete joke. Ji Tianqing. You damned beast, this sovereign will definitely kill you and tear you to pieces. The incomparable humiliation and anger made him determined that as long as he had the chance, he would make Ji Tianqing die without a burial place. At the same time, in the square outside the temple, the geniuses from various countries hadn't left yet. They were gathered under a huge stone tablet, discussing excitedly. Just now, the black stone tablet that was more than 1,000 feet tall lit up with a dazzling white light, revealing 2 lines of golden words. The sudden change caused everyone to be filled with shock. They only felt that it was inconceivable. Some of the more knowledgeable geniuses immediately understood the meaning of the golden words and cheered excitedly. Oh my God! An oracle has come! This is incredible! Lu Li went to the Divine Lord today and was favored by the Divine Lord. An oracle has come! The exclamations and shouts of several young geniuses spread across the square. Like a stone that stirred up 1,000 ripples, the geniuses from various countries immediately understood that the golden words on the huge stone tablet were the legendary oracle. Everyone swarmed over and surrounded the stone tablet. They raised their heads to look at the dazzling golden oracle and let out cries of surprise as they discussed among themselves. "This is incredible. I am lucky enough to see the oracle with my own eyes. I have heard a long time ago that only the emperors of various countries and the great guardians could receive the oracle when they went to the Divine Lord. I can't believe that Luli got one as well. I read in a book that in the past 1,000 years, only 4 people had received the oracle when they went to the temple to worship. Luli was once an apprentice and a talented martial arts genius. Every couple of years, he would come to the temple to worship. His pious worship must have moved the Divine Lord. That's why the Divine Lord cherished talents and gave him the oracle. Now, Luli is going to be famous and awe the 6 countries. He can be favored by the Divine Lord. In the future, he will be as successful as the holy emperors of various countries." Everyone's faces were filled with excitement, as well as intense envy and jealousy. Just as everyone was discussing animatedly, someone suddenly let out a cry of surprise. "Look, why is that guy coming out?" Many young geniuses turned to the gate of the temple. They saw a handsome man in a white robe walking out of the temple. Everyone was not unfamiliar with him and recognized him immediately. He was Ji Tianqing. Instantly, the gazes of the geniuses from various countries were gathered on him, revealing playful and mocking sneers. "Strange, the worship ceremony is not over yet. Why did this kid come out in advance? Humph, the worship is not over and he dares to leave rashly. This is a great disrespect to the Divine Lord. Ji Tianqing is really unrepentant. Last time, he caused such a big disturbance. Today, he is disrespectful to the Divine Lord. I'm afraid he will be expelled from the vast heaven pagoda soon." Luli brought him to worship the Divine Lord. But when Luli got the oracle, he left in advance. How can the gap between people be so big? Luli is a dragon that soars in the 9 heavens, and this kid is a worm in the mud. What is he? How can he be mentioned in the same breath as Luli? The geniuses from all over the world were discussing without restraint. They were all gloating and laughing without restraint. Among the crowd, Lan Yiqing, Quanlong, and the geniuses from the Rising Cloud Empire stared at Ji Tianqing, smiling happily as if their hatred had been vented. "Ha, ha, ha. Ji Tianqing must be kicked out. Right. He is disrespectful to the Divine Lord. He has no right to enter the temple to worship. It is only natural that he is kicked out. It is funny that this guy wants to ride on Luli's coattails. Luli got the oracle and sword while he ran away with his tail between his legs. How ironic. Of all the people present, the ones from the Rising Cloud Empire were the happiest to see Ji Tianqing. As far as they were concerned, the more humiliated Ji Tianqing was, the more satisfied they would be. In the time for 10 breaths, Ji Tianqing walked across the plaza and arrived in front of the crowd. He glanced at the oracle on the stone tablet. He wanted to leave and go back to the vast heaven pagoda. However, the geniuses from various countries did not shy away from laughing and talking about him with contempt. Chapter 1533. Today, the young geniuses of the Outcloud Empire were here to humiliate Ji Tianqing. Lan Yiqing had led the young geniuses to stop Ji Tianqing from going to the temple to worship. Instead, Ji Tianqing was angered to the point of vomiting blood. Now that Ji Tianqing had been kicked out of the temple, she would not let go of this chance to humiliate Ji Tianqing. The young geniuses stood in a row in front of Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing stopped. He looked at Lan Yiqing and the others with a straight face and said coldly, "Good dogs don't block the way. If you know what's good for you, piss off." As soon as he spoke, Lan Yiqing and the others were livid with rage. Their eyes were burning with rage. Lan Yiqing sneered and said with contempt, Ji Tianqing. How dare you be so arrogant under these circumstances? You are courting death. Kuang Long also grinned and sneered, ha, ha, you have no shame in betraying your own country. You want to curry favor with Lu Li of the Empire of Thousand Snow. You are willing to be his lackey. What is the result? He worships the immortal Lord and is favored by the immortal Lord. Now, you are kicked out of the temple. You don't even have the right to worship the immortal Lord. Ji Tianqing's eyes grew cold. There was a glint of coldness in his eyes. He put on a meaningful sneer. He glanced over to Kuang Long, Lan Yiqing and the young geniuses of the Outcloud Empire and said in a low voice, You think the immortal Lord gave the oracle to Lu Li and I was kicked out of the temple? So, you bunch of clowns can't wait to jump out and humiliate me? The young geniuses let out disdainful smirks. Of course. You're the one humiliating me, you traitor. Ha, 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 at least you know your place. Ji Tianqing, you have been expelled from the Outcloud Empire. You don't deserve to be a citizen of our country. Traitor. Kneel down and admit your sins. The geniuses of the Chu Yun Empire had the advantage in numbers, and Ji Tianqing had been chased out of the temple. Under such circumstances, the geniuses were naturally arrogant and wanted to take the opportunity to humiliate him, ruthlessly trampling on his dignity in front of the geniuses of the 6 nations. Ji Tianqing suddenly smiled. He was so angry that he laughed. His entire body erupted with soaring battle intent. His incomparably powerful aura was like an invisible mountain that pressed down on everyone. You bunch of clowns dare to point fingers in front of me? I've already warned you before. Since you insist on seeking death, I'll grant you your wish. He roared with a domineering aura, and his entire body lit up with a golden light that soared into the sky. His body also suddenly grew to a height of more than 10 meters, turning into a majestic giant. All of you, get down. Amidst his furious roar, he suddenly waved his palms and fiercely slapped at the 3 young geniuses in front of him. Heaven-seizing palm. The 3 of them were sneering and mocking him when suddenly, 2 giant golden palms descended from the sky with a force that could destroy heaven and earth. The 3 of them instantly froze, and their eyes widened in horror. They had never imagined that Ji Tianqing would actually be so arrogant, attacking at the slightest disagreement. The power of the giant golden palms was too terrifying, and the speed of the attack was also extremely fast. Before they could react, they were hit by the giant golden palms. Bam! Bam! A deafening muffled sound suddenly exploded in the square. 2 giant pits were formed on the hard and sturdy stone ground. The 3 young geniuses of the Chu Yun Empire were lying in the ruins, covered in blood, and had already fainted. The sudden upheaval left everyone in the square dumbfounded. The geniuses of the various nations had an incredulous expression as they looked at Ji Tianqing with astonishment and exclaimed, Oh my God! Is this guy crazy? He wants to become enemies with more than 10 geniuses of the Chu Yun Empire? He actually dares to injure other geniuses outside the temple? He's really lawless. This guy is finished. No one dares to cause trouble on Mount God Bestowment. He's dead meat. Heh heh, the people of the Chu Yun Empire are actually fighting among themselves outside the temple. What a joke. The young geniuses of the various nations quickly retreated to the edge of the square and watched the battle calmly, as if they were waiting for a good show. Song Zhanyu, who was in the crowd, stared deeply at Ji Tianqing and sneered. Humph. This guy is really arrogant. He actually dares to fight more than 10 young geniuses in front of everyone. That's good. I can see how strong he is. Perhaps he will even use the legendary Sword of Burial of Heaven. At the same time, Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the others, who were inexplicably shocked, finally came to their senses. They looked at the deep pit in front of them and their 3 companions at the bottom of the pit. They were instantly furious and roared angrily. Ji Tianqing! How dare you make a move outside the divine hall? You traitor! How dare you attack your own countrymen? You're heartless. Ji Tianqing, don't blame us for bullying you because we outnumber you. Today, we're going to clean up the Chu Yun Empire and teach you a lesson. Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the others were shocked and angry at first. After they calmed down, they were overjoyed. Everyone saw that Ji Tianqing had started the fight. If they joined forces to fight back and beat Ji Tianqing half to death and destroy his cultivation, it would be reasonable. They would not be punished. This was the best chance for them to take revenge and destroy Ji Tianqing. At this thought, Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the others all used their secret skills and attacked Ji Tianqing with all their might. Ji Tianqing was not afraid. He sneered disdainfully, "A bunch of trash. I said I would beat you up. Do I have to pick a time?" As he said that, he swung his fists again and used his ultimate move to attack the two young geniuses not far away. Star-shattering fist. The two young geniuses were Kuang Long's fans. They had been following Kuang Long and were very arrogant. They had been cursing him. However, the two of them were only at the 4th level of the primordial spirit realm. Before they could defend themselves, the two balls of dazzling golden fist radiance had already struck the two of them. Bam! Bam! With two dull thuds, the two young geniuses were sent flying. Blood spurted out of their orifices as they landed 1,000 feet away. The two young geniuses smashed into the edge of the square. After they landed, they fell unconscious and did not get up again. At this time, Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the 6 young geniuses all used their powerful ultimate moves to attack Ji Tianqing. Pillars of fire, ice blades, and sword radiance of various colors, as well as the radiance of spells that covered the sky, fell from the sky and enveloped Ji Tianqing. The area within a radius of 3,000 meters was instantly transformed into a colorful and dazzling world. Ji Tianqing's figure was about to be drowned by the various spells. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing was fearless even though he was facing 8 opponents alone. Golden light flashed behind him and a pair of golden wings appeared. Chapter 1534. Bam! 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 At that moment, Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the others all sneered, as if they had succeeded. Cold, sinister smiles hung on the corners of their lips. The geniuses from the various countries had mixed feelings. Some felt sorry for Bam. Others were gloating. Most of them were certain that Ji Tianqing would not be able to withstand the combined attacks of the 8 geniuses. Even a genius at the 6th level of the primordial soul realm would be killed on the spot, let alone his 5th level of the primordial soul realm. Everyone was dumbfounded. They could not believe what they had seen. He saw that the square with a radius of 3,000 meters had become a fragmented ruin. Several huge deep pits had appeared, and the surroundings were covered with cracks like a spider web. Ji Tianqing stood above the crater, unscathed. He stepped into the sky, his body tall and straight. A pair of large golden wings bloomed behind his back, radiating a holy light under the sunlight. He was as majestic as a god. He looked down at Kuang Long and the rest coldly. He was exuding a domineering aura. Everyone was stunned for a long time. When they came to their senses, they exclaimed. Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the rest were also shocked. Their hearts were beating wildly. How is this possible? He's unscathed? That damned bastard. In just 2 short months, he's become even stronger than before. We've broken ties with him. No matter what, we have to cripple him today. Otherwise, there will be no end to our troubles. The 8 geniuses communicated secretly. They exchanged looks and reached a consensus. Let's attack together. Let's end this quickly. Along with a few low shouts, the 8 geniuses attacked Ji Tianqing with all their might. A cold light flashed in Ji Tianqing's eyes. He waved his palms without hesitation. He unleashed all his strength and used his ultimate move. Heaven-capturing palm. Star-shattering fist. His left hand struck out a giant golden palm, while his right hand struck out a mountain-like golden fist radiance, blasting towards the young geniuses. Pang pang pang. Another series of muffled sounds burst out. The 4 young geniuses were sent flying by the giant golden palm and fist radiance. They spat out mouthfuls of blood as they were sent flying and smashed into the square. These 4 people were the same as the previous 5. They could not withstand a single blow from him and were severely injured on the spot. Such a powerful and invincible strength shocked all the geniuses of the various countries, causing them to reveal a look of deep shock. Following that, Ji Tianqing used the divine concealment step, maintaining his stealth state as he quietly rushed to the side of the 2 young geniuses. Bang bang! With a punch and a palm, he sent the 2 young geniuses flying and landed in a corner of the square. Their chests and abdomens caved in, and blood spurted out from their noses and mouths. After falling to the ground, they struggled a few times, but failed to get up. At this point, he had already defeated 11 young geniuses. Only Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long were left. They were still using their ultimate techniques to fight against him. Only the 2 of you are left. Even though you have lost to me, I don't mind trampling on you one more time. Ji Tianqing shouted in a dignified tone, emitting a powerful aura. With that said, he was about to use his secret skill to crush Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long. But at this moment, an angry roar like a great bell suddenly exploded in the air above the square. Stop! Everyone turned around. They saw more than a dozen powerful warriors walking out from the gate of the temple. The leader was the chief guardian. He flew over to the square with a gloomy expression. The 6 emissaries followed him and hurried to the square as well. At the end of the group was Lu Li, Jiang Ningxue, and several geniuses of the Empire of Thousand Snow. Clearly, the fight just now was so loud that the chief guardian and the emissaries were alerted. The square quieted down. Nobody said a word. They looked at Ji Tianqing and the chief guardian. Everyone secretly thought that Ji Tianqing was finished this time. The chief guardian would never let him go. Sure enough, the chief guardian looked at Ji Tianqing with a dignified expression and shouted in a deep voice, Ji Tianqing, you guys actually flouted the laws of the vast heaven pagoda and fought outside the temple. How should you be punished? Everyone originally thought that the chief guardian would definitely pin the crime of offending the majesty of the divine master on Ji Tianqing. But the chief guardian did not mention the divine master. He only said that he flouted the laws of the vast heaven pagoda. This made the geniuses of various countries somewhat puzzled. They faintly felt that something was not quite right. Ji Tianqing glanced at the chief guardian expressionlessly and said in a deep voice, Chief Guardian, I suggest you investigate the facts clearly before convicting. The chief guardian froze. Thinking of all the things that happened before, he was somewhat fearful. He frowned and said in a deep voice, Okay, I enforce the law impartially. I never wronged anyone, but I won't be partial to anyone either. Now, you tell me, what in the world is going on here? Ji Tianqing shot a glance at Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long. He said in an indifferent tone, a bunch of mad dogs that bite people indiscriminately. They blocked my path and even wanted to bully me by relying on numbers. Since that's the case, I can only teach them how to behave. The moment these words came out, the geniuses of various countries sucked in a cold breath one after another, revealing looks of shock and astonishment on their faces. My heavens, this guy is simply crazy to the point of defying the laws. Facing the chief guardian's questioning, he still didn't hurry to plead guilty or explain. He's actually so arrogant. Isn't this courting death? Too arrogant. This brat offended the chief guardian once in the first place. Now, he has such a vile attitude. He's completely hopeless. Wait and see. He's arrogant for a while now. There'll be time for him to cry right away. Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long were scolded in public by Ji Tianqing. They were so ashamed that they trembled in anger. Kuang Long stepped forward bravely and bowed to the chief guardian. He explained, "Chief Guardian, a dozen of our disciples couldn't stand Ji Tianqing's ugly face and his shameless act of betraying our country. In order to protect the dignity of our country, we reprimanded him a little, hoping that he would repent and turn over a new leaf. But we didn't expect him to be so arrogant and audacious. He actually dared to fight outside the divine hall and seriously injured 11 of our countrymen until they fainted." Before Kuang Long could finish his words, the chief guardian and the 6 divine messengers' faces changed. Their eyes were filled with deep shock. The chief guardian looked at Ji Tianqing with burning eyes and asked in disbelief, "Ji Tianqing, did you really start the fight first?" "That's right." Ji Tianqing did not bother to explain or lie. He answered expressionlessly. The glint in the chief guardian's eyes intensified. He asked in disbelief, "You fought a dozen of them alone?" "That's right." Ji Tianqing nodded with an indifferent expression. The chief guardian narrowed his eyes immediately. Perilous waves surged in his heart. This brat fought a dozen of them alone and came out unscathed. But he knocked 11 geniuses unconscious? Why didn't this seat notice that he had such tyrannical strength previously? No wonder this brat has always been arrogant and haughty. No wonder he could cause the Divine Master to send down an oracle. With his strength at the 5th level Essence Spirit Realm, he can reach such terrifying combat strength. He is indeed a rare genius. The few divine messengers exchanged glances and saw the shock in each other's eyes. Previously, they were still trying to figure out the meaning of the oracle. Now, they could finally confirm that the oracle was for Ji Tianqing. Kuang Long saw that the chief guardian and divine messengers were silent. He said somewhat anxiously, "Chief Guardian." Ji Tianqing turned a deaf ear to the vast heaven pagoda's laws and openly fought outside the divine hall. Chapter 1535. Before Kuang Long could finish his words, the chief guardian bellowed, "Shut up. I have been in charge of the Haotian pagoda for hundreds of years. Do I need you to teach me? I dare not." Kuang Long was pale with fright. He lowered his head and saluted at once. The chief guardian secretly communicated with the several messengers and then announced, "The mountain of investiture is a holy land of martial arts. It does not prohibit disciples from learning from each other. This is a personal grudge between the disciples of the Outcloud Empire and Ji Tianqing. The Haotian pagoda will not interfere. However, you should not fight in the plaza in public. You will damage the dignity of the Holy Land. If there are any conflicts or disputes between disciples, please go to the arena to resolve them. All the disciples that have participated in the fight will be punished by going to the Cliff of Reflection for 10 days as a punishment." When the Great Protector announced the punishment, everyone was stunned. Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the others were so shocked that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. No way. This is the punishment? The chief guardian has always enforced the law with an iron face. How can he be so gentle? These people have made such a big mess and they are only punished with 10 days of reflection? When did the chief guardian become so gentle? This is not right. Ji Tianqing started the fight. How can he be punished the same as the others? This is not a punishment. It is more like the chief guardian is siding with Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing has offended the chief guardian before. How can he be siding with Ji Tianqing? The young geniuses from all over the world were in an uproar. They were discussing with shock and confusion. Everyone could tell that the chief guardian not only did not punish Ji Tianqing according to the rules, but also downplayed the matter and punished him lightly. This was not normal. The geniuses from different countries were confused and could not understand. Only the chief guardian, Ji Tianqing, the 6 messengers and Lu Li understood the real reason. Standing at the edge of the plaza, Lu Li stared at Ji Tianqing with a gloomy look. Deep down in his eyes was surging hatred and naked jealousy. Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the others came back to their senses and hurriedly complained to the Great Guardian. Great Guardian, it was clearly Ji Tianqing who caused trouble first. Great Guardian, please deal with this matter impartially and punish Ji Tianqing severely. Only then can we convince the masses. Ji Tianqing is vicious and merciless. He has injured 11 disciples. He must be severely punished. Chief Protector, Ji Tianqing offended the Divine Master during the worship ceremony before. Today, he once again blasphemed the Divine Master's dignity. He must be expelled from the Clear Sky Pagoda. Seeing that the 8 young geniuses had all opened their mouths to protest, the Great Guardian's face turned cold as he shouted in a dignified tone, "Shut up. I'm merciful, that's why I'm giving you a lighter punishment. If you continue to pester me without reason, I will punish you severely. As for offending the Divine Master's dignity, is that something you have the right to say? Open your eyes wide and take a good look at what the oracle on the stone tablet says." Hearing this, all the geniuses were stunned. Everyone turned their heads in unison and looked at the golden words on the stone tablet. Anyone who wasn't an idiot could understand what the Great Guardian meant. They could all guess that there was something more to the oracle. As expected, when they took a closer look at the oracle, their expressions all changed. Among the crowd, Perfect Een was even more shocked. He exclaimed in disbelief. When he first entered the Mount of Investiture, he was struck by lightning. This is Ji Tianqing? He pointed out the answer in one sentence. Everyone was stunned. They were almost scared out of their wits. Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long, in particular, were stupefied. They stared at the oracle in a daze. They were petrified. No way. This is impossible. I don't believe this is true. Ji Tianqing, that bastard, how could he get the oracle? Isn't it Lu Li who got the oracle? How come it's Ji Tianqing now? Wasn't Ji Tianqing kicked out of the temple in advance? How can he get the oracle to come? Crazy. We must be out of our minds. The nearly 100 geniuses from the 6 states were so shocked that they could not speak coherently. They did not know what to do. At this moment, the Great Guardian announced in a loud voice, Ji Tianqing paid his respects to the Immortal Master today. He is favored by the Immortal Master and the oracle is here. In the past 200 years, this is the first time the Immortal Master has sent down an oracle. This is not only an honor for Ji Tianqing, but also for the entire Haotian Pagoda. It is worth celebrating. Because of this, I have shown you mercy and given you a lighter punishment. Hearing the Great Protector's words, everyone came to a sudden realization. No wonder the Great Guardian suddenly changed his attitude and sided with Ji Tianqing. A person that could be favored by the Immortal Master and get the oracle to come should be protected and valued. But no one could figure it out. Didn't Ji Tianqing offend the Immortal Master's dignity? How could he be favored by the Immortal Master? Of the dozens of young geniuses here, anyone could get the oracle except for Ji Tianqing. But the truth was right in front of them. The Great Guardian and the 6 messengers all thought so. Lu Li, who was in the corner of the plaza, also looked awful. He was filled with disappointment and shame. All signs pointed to the fact that the oracle was given to Ji Tianqing by the Immortal Master. The plaza was in a hubbub of voices. Everyone was discussing excitedly. They still could not accept this reality. The Great Guardian frowned. He waved his sleeve and ordered, "Let's go. This is the end of today's matter." Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long clenched their fists in anger and glared at Ji Tianqing. No matter how unwilling they were, they dared not to disobey the Great Guardian's order. They could only suppress their anger and humiliation, turned around and left. But at this moment, a cold voice sounded in the plaza. "Wait! Did I say you could leave?" The sudden cold shout shocked everyone, causing the entire square to quieten down. Everyone turned to Ji Tianqing in surprise and confusion. Lan Yiqing and Quan Long also suppressed their anger. They stared at him with hatred and said in a deep voice, "Ji Tianqing, what do you want? The Great Guardian has announced the punishment. What else do you want?" Ji Tianqing looked down at the two and said with a straight face, "I will abide by the punishment announced by the Great Guardian. But we have not settled our personal grudge yet. Let's settle this once and for all in front of everyone." Lan Yiqing and Quan Long's expressions changed. They were filled with killing intent. "Ji Tianqing, don't push us too far. Push us too far." Ji Tianqing curled his lips and said with contempt, "Just now, when you stopped me in such a threatening manner and humiliated me in turns, did you ever think of pushing me too far? I didn't want to pay attention to you clowns. But you kept pestering me. How can I let you go? I'm going to make you swallow all the filthy words you've used to insult me." Chapter 1536. An incomparably domineering voice spread throughout the entire plaza, shocking everyone's hearts. The various countries' geniuses all stared at Ji Tianqing, revealing thick shock. Their heartbeats and blood flow accelerated. This guy. Really daring to say it. This is the true lawlessness. Either kneel down yourselves, or I'll beat you all to kneel. Too domineering. This is the unyielding character and domineering aura that a peerless genius should have. Yeah, even the Divine Master favored him and gave him an oracle. How can such a peerless genius be humiliated? Don't you guys forget, Ji Tianqing is the Outcloud Empire's #1 genius to begin with. He defeated those two people long ago. Many geniuses discussed animatedly, staring fixedly at Lan Yiqing and Quan Long, wanting to see how they would wrap things up. Lan Yiqing and Quan Long nearly exploded in anger. Their faces alternated between green and white, and their hands and feet were trembling. The two were also martial Dao geniuses with extraordinary backgrounds. They had always been proud and arrogant. They had never suffered such humiliation in their lives. Quan Long was in a violent rage. His eyes flickered with scarlet killing intent as he stared fixedly at Ji Tianqing. His voice was low and hoarse as he shouted, "Ji Tianqing. You bastard, even if I, Quan Long, die in battle, I absolutely won't submit to you. So what if you obtain the oracle? In my eyes, you'll always be a petty person who fawns on the powerful." In contrast, Lan Yiqing was still considered calm, restraining her anger and killing intent. She raised her head to look at the Chief Protector and said in a deep voice, "Chief Protector, you saw it. Ji Tianqing ignored your decision and was overbearing." The Chief Protector furrowed his brows and said expressionlessly, "This seat already said that the vast heaven pagoda won't interfere in the personal grudges between disciples. However, this seat and the 6 divine envoys are present. We can be the witnesses and allow you guys to duel. But no lives can be lost." 2 simple sentences expressed the vast heaven pagoda's attitude. Lan Yiqing was in complete despair. Counting on the Chief Protector to resolve the situation clearly could not be counted on. After all, a genius who obtained the oracle would receive the Divine Master's favor and would definitely become a peerless powerhouse in the future. Compared to Ji Tianqing, she and Quan Long appeared insignificant. It was already extremely benevolent of the Great Guardian to protect their lives. The hope in Lan Yiqing's eyes faded bit by bit, eventually turning into endless coldness and killing intent. She didn't regret her previous actions. She only regretted that she didn't use the Lan family's power to kill Ji Tianqing back in the Chu Yun Empire. Quan Long took the lead and flew into the air, standing 1,000 feet away from Ji Tianqing, staring at him with a murderous look on his face. There was a bronze chain wrapped around his body, and his entire body was emitting a dark red light, releasing a powerful aura. Ji Tianqing. Last time, I was careless and lost to you. Today. He glared at Ji Tianqing and growled coldly. But Ji Tianqing ignored him. He pointed a finger at Lan Yiqing and said indifferently, "Come at me together. I don't want to waste time." As soon as he said this, everyone was shocked. How arrogant and domineering. Quan Long was completely ignored. This unparalleled humiliation almost made him vomit blood. Lan Yiqing was also angered by Ji Tianqing's disdainful attitude. "You damned bastard. You're too arrogant. Today, I'll avenge myself." As she spoke, a blue light flashed in her palm, and a crystal-clear blue sword appeared. It was the Extreme Ice Sword. Stars in the sky. She growled coldly. Her hands formed a mysterious seal, and she controlled the Extreme Ice Sword to shoot out 360 rays of icy blue sword radiance towards Ji Tianqing. The sword radiance covered the sky, as dazzling as the stars in the sky. The terrifying sword radiance exuded an extremely cold aura, freezing everything within a radius of 20,000 feet. In an instant, Ji Tianqing's body was surrounded by more than 300 rays of sword radiance. He didn't take out any weapon, nor did he use his primordial spirit Dharma power. He only used his fists to shoot out 2 rays of dark golden fist radiance. Star-shattering fist. He used all of his power, and the fist radiance was as powerful as a mountain. Kaboom! The icy blue sword radiance that covered the sky was smashed into countless ice shards by the fists. At this moment, Quan Long had arrived. He waved the ancient bronze chain and slashed out 19 blood-red giant swords, slashing towards Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing waved his hands again, and slapped at the sword radiance. Heaven-seizing palm. The 2 giant golden palms slammed into the blood-red sword, causing 2 loud bangs to ring out. The dozen blood-red giant swords were all shattered. Lan Yiqing and Quan Long's full-powered attacks were easily neutralized by Ji Tianqing. Both of them were shocked, and their eyes were filled with worry. The geniuses and oracles of God from various countries all retreated to the edge of the square, watching the battle calmly. At this moment, Ji Tianqing launched his counterattack. He suddenly used the stealth step and disappeared into the sky. The next moment, he appeared beside Quan Long and punched him in the face. Crack! Quan Long didn't expect this, and he couldn't dodge at all. The left side of his face caved in on the spot. His bones were shattered, and his flesh was badly mangled. Under the intense pain, he waved his bronze chain crazily and released 2 blood-red giant dragons to attack Ji Tianqing. However, Ji Tianqing's figure instantly disappeared, dodging the blood dragon's attack. The 2 blood-red dragons flew across the square, and were about to hit the temple. At this critical moment, the Great Guardian waved his right hand and grabbed the 2 blood-red giant dragons, crushing them. The 2 destructive giant dragons were as weak as earthworms in front of him. At this moment, Ji Tianqing dodged the attacks of Quan Long and Lan Yiqing and appeared on Quan Long's right side like a ghost. Bang! He punched the right side of Quan Long's face again. The right side of Quan Long's face was smashed, and blood and broken bones spurted out. He was completely unrecognizable. Quan Long had been the one who yelled the loudest, calling Ji Tianqing a traitor, a dog, and shameless. But now, Ji Tianqing had purposely smashed his entire face as punishment for his foul mouth. Quan Long flew into a rage after suffering such heavy injuries. He immediately summoned his primordial spirit and used his ultimate skill to attack Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, turned invisible and dodged the attack. He appeared and disappeared like a ghost and charged towards Lan Yiqing. Before Lan Yiqing could react, he swept his leg out and hit her knees. With a cracking sound, her legs were broken on the spot, and she let out a cry of pain. Then, Ji Tianqing's figure flashed in and out of the square. Every time he appeared, he was beside Lan Yiqing or Kuang Long, and he used his fists and feet to injure them. Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long were beaten to a pulp. Countless bones and joints were broken, and their bodies were covered in blood. Even if they used their primordial spirit dharma forms and domain mystic arts, they couldn't do anything to Ji Tianqing. Back in the ranking battle, Ji Tianqing was only at the 4th level of the primordial spirit realm. Lan Yiqing could fight him for a while before losing. Chapter 1537. After a short while, the battle on the square stopped. Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long were both covered in wounds. Their tattered clothes were dyed red with blood, and they looked particularly miserable. Kuang Long was beyond recognition. His body was almost destroyed, but he still stood stubbornly on the ruins and did not fall. Lan Yiqing's knees and ankles were broken. He could not stand at all. He could only kneel on one knee with the extreme ice sword in his hands. Both of them were panting as they tried their best to suppress their injuries. They could no longer fight back. If they continued fighting, their bodies would definitely be destroyed. Ji Tianqing had beaten the two of them to such a state with absolute dominance, but he was not injured at all. He stood 100 steps away from the two of them. His face was cold as he stared at them indifferently. "Kneel. Apologize." A cold and majestic voice rang out above the square. It shook Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long's hearts. Both of them shuddered. They were furious. Lan Yiqing's eyes looked like they were about to spit fire. The hearts of the geniuses from all over the world were also in their throats. Everyone stared at Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long, wondering what they would do. Refuse to admit their mistakes and apologize? Then they would definitely end up in a miserable state. If they really did kneel and apologize, their reputation would be ruined. They would never be able to hold their heads high again. If they stayed on Mount God Seal, they would always be humiliated and ridiculed by others. Only the Great Guardian and the 6 divine envoys could resolve this situation. However, the Great Guardian had already stated that he would not interfere with their personal grudge with Ji Tianqing. Now, they could only solve this problem themselves. "Ji Tianqing, don't even think about making me apologize. Kill me if you have the guts." Kuang Long straightened his neck and raised his mangled head as he let out a furious roar. Lan Yiqing held the extreme ice sword in both hands. His face was extremely cold. He stared sharply at Ji Tianqing and said through gritted teeth, "You want me to apologize? Over my dead body?" Both of them were very determined. They would rather die than kneel and apologize. Ji Tianqing had long expected this. He sneered, "You're really stubborn." As soon as he finished speaking, a majestic primordial spirit pressure gushed out from his body and pressed down on Kuang Long and Lan Yiqing. An invisible, enormous pressure descended from the sky like a towering mountain. Instantly, the two of them bent their backs and lowered their heads. Lan Yiqing was originally kneeling on one knee, holding the extreme ice sword with both hands. At this moment, she was forced to kneel on the ground. Her body was bent like a bow, and her head was almost touching the ground. Mad Dragon was originally standing, but at this moment, he also bowed deeply, as if he was bowing to Ji Tianqing. Cracking noises could be heard from all the bones in his body, as if they were about to break. However, he was still stubbornly holding on, desperately resisting the suppressive power, unwilling to kneel no matter what. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing waved his hands and formed a mysterious seal, executing a secret technique. Dharma body of heaven and earth. As the seal was formed, the power of heaven and earth within 1,000 miles gathered on his body. Instantly, his aura skyrocketed, and his entire person became more sacred and majestic. He was as majestic as a mountain, and as majestic as a god. "Kneel!" He roared angrily, releasing an even more powerful suppressive power, which slammed toward Lan Yiqing and Mad Dragon. Mad Dragon was suddenly hit hard and could no longer hold on. His legs were instantly shattered, and he knelt on the ground with a plop. Two deep depressions appeared on the ground that was filled with rubble as he knelt, almost swallowing his two legs. Under the terrifying suppressive power, his spine kept bending, and his head slowly reached toward the ground. Then, with a muffled bang, his entire head was smashed into the ground, creating a crater. Lan Yiqing's fate was the same. She knelt on the ground, half of her body buried in the rubble. Her head was also smashed into the ground, buried in dust. No matter how unyielding and angry they were forced to kneel and kowtow to Ji Tianqing to apologize. Their reputations were ruined just like that. Their pride and dignity as prodigies were also trampled to the point of being worthless. The prodigies of the 6 nations all felt a chill run down their spines as they looked at Ji Tianqing with fear and trepidation. This guy, what a ruthless method. He didn't kill Lan Yiqing and Mad Dragon. But this kind of humiliation was even more terrifying than killing them. From now on, they must never offend Ji Tianqing. Otherwise, they would suffer a fate worse than death. With that in mind, the young prodigies who had mocked Ji Tianqing before couldn't help but shrink their necks, and their hearts were filled with worry. At this moment, Ji Tianqing looked down at Lan Yiqing and Mad Dragon. He said in an indifferent voice, "There is no source of fortune or disaster. Those who humiliate others are bound to humiliate themselves. Don't provoke me in the future." As his voice fell, he retracted his invisible suppressive power. The sky within a radius of 10,000 feet was instantly unsealed. Lan Yiqing and Mad Dragon had regained their freedom. They hurriedly struggled out of the rubble and fled in a sorry state. The unparalleled humiliation and the discussions of the prodigies of the 6 nations made them want to die. They didn't dare to stay for even a moment longer. They didn't even dare to look at anyone. They just wanted to leave as soon as possible and escape from everyone's sight. Their leg bones were already shattered. With the support of their magic power, they staggered out of the plaza and returned to Chu Yun Palace in a daze. The prodigies of the various nations looked at their sorry figures as they left, and a wave of whispers and discussions erupted. This matter was over. The great guardian waved his hand and ordered 20 golden-armored guards to drag away the unconscious prodigies of the Chu Yun Empire and bring them back to Chu Yun Palace to recuperate. Ji Tianqing didn't stay any longer. He turned around and was about to leave the plaza. However, right at this moment, a vigorous voice suddenly sounded in the square. "Wait!" The sudden cold voice made the prodigies of the various nations quiet down. Even the great guardian and the 6 divine envoys who were about to leave stopped when they heard the voice. A tall man in a dark green robe walked out of the crowd of the great Qian Empire. Under everyone's gaze, he stepped into the air and caught up to Ji Tianqing. He stood 100 steps away from him. This man had sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. His face was upright and his body was tall and straight. He exuded a powerful aura, and there was a trace of arrogance between his brows. When the prodigies of the various nations saw his face, they immediately revealed a puzzled expression and began to whisper to each other. "Isn't that the #1 prodigy of the great Qian Empire, Qian Feiyang? What does he want to do? He actually stopped Ji Tianqing? Could it be that he wants to teach Ji Tianqing a lesson? That's impossible, right? Qian Feiyang is from the great Qian Empire. How could he help someone from the Chu Yun Empire?" Chapter 1538. Everyone had a premonition that Qian Feiyang had a motive for standing up now. The geniuses who were about to leave all returned to the square and watched. Even the chief enforcer and the 6 god envoys were puzzled. They didn't know what Qian Feiyang wanted to do. Ji Tianqing glanced at Qian Feiyang and said indifferently, "What's the matter?" Qian Feiyang stared at him, his body emitting an arrogant aura. He didn't seem to be at a disadvantage. Ji Tianqing, many people think that you've received the God Master's favor and brought about the oracle. From the first sentence of the oracle, it does make some sense. But I don't believe it, and I can't accept this result. It's not just me, but the geniuses of the other countries also don't believe it. Qian Feiyang's expression was arrogant, and his tone was full of energy. Following his words, the young geniuses of the other countries started to discuss. Indeed, nearly half of the geniuses didn't believe that the oracle was for Ji Tianqing, and they all agreed with Qian Feiyang. Ji Tianqing frowned and looked at him coldly. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. No, it's very important. Qian Feiyang shook his head and sneered. He said in a playful tone, in terms of martial talent, you may not be very strong. In terms of strength, you're not even in the top 5, and you're even weaker than me. Including me, there are at least 5 geniuses more qualified than you to receive the oracle. So? Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows, his tone still indifferent. Qian Feiyang's body emitted a strong fighting spirit. He stared at him and said word by word, so, I want to challenge you in front of everyone. I just want everyone to see the truth. The God Master's oracle was definitely not for you. I'm more qualified than you to receive the God Master's favor. His thunderous voice echoed in the square, filled with a domineering and confident aura. The geniuses of the other countries immediately understood Qian Feiyang's goal. They all burst into discussion and cheered. Many people were cheering for him. Ji Tianqing furrowed his brows and coldly looked at Qian Feiyang. He was thinking, this Qian Feiyang is a scheming bastard. He openly challenged me in front of everyone, making it difficult for me to refuse. If he defeats me in front of everyone, not only will he diminish my prestige, but also raise his reputation. Previously, Jiu had given him a name list that recorded the information of the 6 nations' geniuses. He knew that Qian Feiyang was the great's #1 genius. This person had strength at the 6th firmament essence soul realm. He was ranked 4th among the geniuses of the 6 states, second only to Jiang Ningxue. Ji Tianqing thought to himself, ever since I entered Mount God Seal, I haven't fought in front of anyone. Although I injured Lan Yiqing, Guanglong, and the others, and shocked the geniuses of the other countries with the power of the oracle. But that's not enough. I'm the Outcloud Empire's #1 genius. It's normal for me to defeat Lan Yiqing and Guanglong. Since Qian Feiyang challenged me, I'll use this opportunity to crush him in front of everyone. He wants to trample on my prestige. I'll use him as a stepping stone to intimidate the other geniuses. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing made up his mind. At this moment, Qian Feiyang saw him frowning and not saying anything. Qian Feiyang sneered contemptuously. Ji Tianqing, you're so quiet. Don't tell me you're rejecting my challenge. This isn't a personal grudge. It's just a friendly spar. We can go to the arena and ask the divine envoys to supervise the battle. The great guardian frowned and shouted in a stern voice, Qian Feiyang. I just announced the result. The divine master gave the divine oracle to Ji Tianqing. He's the son of the divine oracle. Ji Tianqing fought the Outcloud Empire's disciples alone and defeated them all. That's enough to prove his strength. Moreover, he just fought and used up a lot of his spiritual power. How can you take advantage of him and challenge him now? Although the Great Guardian's words were fair and impartial, the Great Guardian's words were not biased. However, when many geniuses heard this, they felt that the head enforcer was biased towards Ji Tianqing, and felt sour in their hearts. Qian Feiyang saluted the Great Guardian and smiled. Great Guardian, the battle just now seemed wonderful and shocking. But it was actually very ordinary. I can defeat the Outcloud Empire's trash alone. He then looked at Ji Tianqing and said in a mocking tone, since you used up a lot of your spiritual power and don't dare to accept the challenge, we'll do it another day. I'll give you 3 days to recuperate. 3 days later, we'll meet on the arena." Before he could finish, Ji Tianqing interrupted him and said in a low voice, "There's no need for another day. Let's do it now, right here." Hearing that Shen Tian agreed on the spot, Qian Feiyang sneered. The young geniuses from various countries also cheered excitedly, their faces full of anticipation. To the crowd, Ji Tianqing's bullying of the Outcloud Empire's geniuses seemed arrogant and domineering. But it wasn't that difficult. Only by fighting with the top geniuses could one's true strength be shown. It was more exciting and more enjoyable. The Great Guardian was stunned. He frowned and looked at Ji Tianqing. He secretly transmitted his voice, "Ji Tianqing, don't try to be brave. If you lose, it will affect my and the Oracle's prestige." Ji Tianqing transmitted his voice back. He said with certainty, "A mere Qian Feiyang is nothing to worry about. If he wants to use me as a stepping stone, he's destined to break his leg." Seeing that he was so confident, the Great Guardian didn't say anything else. Swoosh! He waved his palms and shot out a 7-colored light screen that covered the sky and covered half of the square. A saint-level defensive array was immediately formed, protecting the square in front of the palace. The Great Guardian, the 6 oracles, and the geniuses from various countries all retreated outside the array, leaving only Ji Tianqing and Qian Feiyang in the square. No matter how they fought, they wouldn't destroy the buildings outside the array, nor would they hurt the people outside. The two stood in the ruined square, staring at each other coldly, secretly accumulating their aura and magic power. Qian Feiyang said contemptuously, "What a pity. You just got the oracle. Before you can enjoy the glory of the oracle, you're going to be stepped on by me. I want everyone to see that I'm more outstanding than the oracle's son. From now on, the glory and resources that should have belonged to you will belong to me." Ji Tianqing looked at him expressionlessly. He wasn't angry at all. He said indifferently, "Your plan is good, but it's destined to fail. You'll become another clown." Chapter 1539. Qian Feiyang purposely infuriated Ji Tianqing to affect his mental state and combat strength. However, Ji Tianqing was not affected at all. Instead, his confident and arrogant words angered Qian Feiyang so much that he frowned and his expression turned cold. However, he immediately calmed down and retaliated with an even more arrogant tone. He. What's the use of a sharp tongue? I've long reached the 6th level of the Essence Soul Realm, while you're only at the 5th level. Furthermore, your dermic powers have been greatly depleted. Don't say that I'm bullying you. I can easily defeat you without using any Dharma treasures or weapons." Ji Tianqing revealed a look of pity and chuckled. "I advise you to take out your Dharma treasures and go all out. Otherwise, you won't even be able to last 3 moves before collapsing." How arrogant! Qian Feiyang grew even angrier as his eyes emitted a dense cold light. He had to admit that he was not as calm as Ji Tianqing in terms of mental state. There was no way he could win in a verbal battle. He decided not to waste any more words and immediately took out a dark golden spear and gripped it tightly in his hands. It was a golden divine spear about 2 meters long and as thick as a child's arm. A golden coiling dragon was engraved on the spear's body. The long and narrow diamond-shaped spear blade flickered with a resplendent golden light and released an extremely domineering aura. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that this was a superior grade Essence Soul Realm Dharma treasure with extraordinary power. Ji Tianqing, cut the crap. I'll definitely defeat you within 10 moves with this coiling dragon spear. Qian Feiyang roared with an imposing aura. Flames surged from his body as he brandished the coiling dragon spear with both hands and stabbed it at Ji Tianqing. Otherworldly dragon. The coiling dragon spear stabbed with all its might, emitting a dazzling red light and letting out a high-pitched dragon roar. In the sky, 100-feet-long fiery red dragon immediately condensed. It swooped down from the sky and pounced at Ji Tianqing. Immediately, the entire square was enveloped by a dazzling fiery light, turning it dark red. The terrifyingly high temperature burned the air, turning the defensive array into a vacuum. Ji Tianqing was in the sea of fire and was about to be pounced on by the fiery red dragon. At the critical moment, he calmly stretched out his hand, and a black sword appeared in his palm. This treasure sword was pitch black and icy cold. A black dragon coiled around the hilt of the sword. This was the black dragon sword formed by the little black dragon. "Draw your sword." Ji Tianqing let out a cold snort. His mind merged with the black dragon sword, and with all his strength, he slashed out 100-meter-long pitch-black sword light. Boom! Amidst a deafening muffled sound, the pitch-black greatsword struck the fiery red dragon head-on. The giant dragon immediately collapsed, exploding into a sky full of flowing flames, like a torrential downpour on the square. However, the power of the pitch-black sword didn't decrease in the slightest as it slashed at Qian Feiyang. Qian Feiyang reacted quickly and used the coiling dragon spear to block in front of him, dodging the attack. He was sent flying backward, crashing heavily into the light wall of the defensive formation. Without waiting for him to counterattack, Ji Tianqing had already used the divine concealment step and appeared in front of him, slashing out a second time with all his might. Heaven-cleaving sword. The black dragon sword emitted a golden light that soared into the sky. It condensed into a gigantic golden sword that was hundreds of meters long, and instantly struck Qian Feiyang. Kaboom! Another thunderous boom rang out, and Qian Feiyang was sent flying again by the gigantic sword. His magic power shield, green robe, and soft armor were all shattered into pieces. When he crawled up from the rubble, his clothes were already ragged, his hair was disheveled, and there was blood at the corner of his mouth. Seeing this scene, the chief guardian and the 6 gods' envoys all revealed shocked expressions. The various prodigies were also shocked, and they all let out cries of disbelief. Wow! Ji Tianqing is actually this strong? They've only exchanged 2 moves, and Qian Feiyang is already beaten to the point where he can't even fight back? That shouldn't be. Qian Feiyang is a prodigy ranked 4th. How can he not be able to block Ji Tianqing? Looks like we've all underestimated Ji Tianqing. That guy's true strength is too terrifying. I didn't believe that Ji Tianqing was the child of God before, but now I'm starting to believe it. The exclamations and discussions of the crowd made Qian Feiyang feel extremely humiliated. Just now, he had boasted in front of everyone that he would defeat Ji Tianqing in front of everyone and take away his honor and cultivation resources. Now, he had been beaten to a pulp after exchanging 2 moves with Ji Tianqing. This was too embarrassing. In his grief and indignation, Qian Feiyang's eyes burned with fury. He shouted angrily, "I thought that I could defeat you with 80% of my strength. I didn't expect you to be so capable. Since that's the case, try my ultimate skill." As he spoke, he waved the coiling dragon spear with both hands, and golden spear shadows covered the sky. In the sky behind him, a dazzling flame lit up, and a 100 feet tall shadow appeared. It was a fiery divine lion the size of a mountain, and it was his primordial spirit Dharma form. Heavenly Fire 10,000 Dragon Spear. Qian Feiyang unleashed all his strength and used his ultimate skill. Tens of thousands of huge golden spear shadows covered the sky above the square, forming a dense forest of spears. The fiery divine lion also waved its sharp claws, opened its huge mouth, and spat out crimson flames that covered the sky and poured down like a flood. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The endless heavenly fire merged with the tens of thousands of spear shadows and bombarded Ji Tianqing like rain. In an instant, the entire square was covered by the spear shadows. The square was in chaos, and no one could see where Ji Tianqing was. Boom, 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 boom. A series of loud explosions shook the sky. The entire square began to shake violently as the raging fire and golden light fiercely battered the defensive formation. Fortunately, the array was a saint-level array and was unbreakable. The destructive shockwaves could not affect the people outside the array. However, everyone's hearts were in their throats. They all stared at the array with wide eyes, waiting for the result. After a while, the golden light and flames that covered the sky dissipated. Qian Feiyang stood proudly in the sky with the coiling dragon spear in his hand, looking majestic. In the sky opposite him, Ji Tianqing also stood proudly in the sky. Not only was he unscathed, but his long hair was not messy at all, and his white robe was still as white as snow. Even if the torrential fire poured down and the myriad dragon spear attacked, it could not harm a single hair on his body. Qian Feiyang was dumbfounded. His eyes were wide open, and his heart was filled with shock. The geniuses of various countries were also dumbfounded, and they all exclaimed. Ji Tianqing looked at Qian Feiyang with a disdainful sneer. "Is this your ultimate skill? How disappointing. Now, I'll show you what a true ultimate skill is." As he spoke, a golden light surged out from behind him, and a golden sword that was thousands of feet tall appeared. It was his primordial spirit Dharma form. His body turned into a raging inferno and merged with the 1,000-foot-tall golden sword of primordial spirit. Vermilion Bird Sacred Sword. The giant sword that was surrounded by flames and purple lightning slashed down from the sky toward Qian Feiyang with a power that could split the sky and earth. The overwhelming flames and lightning condensed into the shadow of a vermilion bird that was as large as a mountain. The entire square was covered by flames and lightning, and the space was in chaos. Chapter 1540. Qian Feiyang's expression changed drastically as he looked at the giant sword that was slashing toward him. His eyes were filled with fear. He didn't expect Ji Tianqing to be able to use such a miraculous sword technique and unleash such terrifying power. At this critical moment, he could only unleash all of his dermic powers and hold the coiling dragon spear to meet the giant sword. One spear to end the universe. He let out a low roar and used another trump card. Vast dermic powers poured into the coiling dragon spear, turning it into a giant dragon spear that was hundreds of feet long. A golden dragon's shadow also appeared. The golden dragon spear unleashed an extremely powerful force and pierced toward the giant sword. This spear seemed to be able to pierce through the sky and destroy all obstacles. Its aura was extremely violent. This was Qian Feiyang's most powerful technique. He didn't want to reveal this trump card and planned to use it in the assessment half a year later. But now, he had to use it in advance. Kaboom! With a loud explosion that shook the 9 heavens, the vermilion bird sacred sword and the golden dragon spear collided, unleashing a torrent of golden light and flames. In an instant, the golden dragon spear that was hundreds of feet long was smashed into pieces by the giant sword and exploded. Then, the vermilion bird sacred sword slashed at Qian Feiyang and slammed into the ground of the plaza. With a loud rumble, the entire plaza was split into 2 halves by the giant sword and a wide gully appeared in the middle. Endless amounts of gravel and dust surged into the sky, obscuring the scene inside the array. Outside the array, everyone held their breaths and stared at the flames and lightning inside the array, searching for Ji Tianqing and Qian Feiyang's figures. Nobody knew who would emerge victorious in the clash of the two's ultimate killer moves. Would Qian Feiyang defeat Ji Tianqing and become famous on Mount Godseal and be valued and nurtured by the Clear Sky Pagoda? Or would Ji Tianqing defeat Qian Feiyang in a domineering manner and prove the extraordinary talent of the Son of God? No one could tell, but they were all looking forward to the outcome. After a long time, the dust and the brilliance of spells in the great array gradually dissipated. He saw that the entire square had turned into ruins. There was a huge gully on the ground, and the surroundings were full of holes and cracks. In the sky, there was only a proud and aloof figure in a white robe. He held a black sword and stood with his hands behind his back. His body was not tall and sturdy, but it was as imposing as a mountain, making people look up to him. Without a doubt, this was Ji Tianqing. He was not injured at all. His expression was normal as he calmly looked down at the ravine on the ground. As for Qian Feiyang, he was struggling to crawl out of the wide gully. When he climbed out of the gully and stood in the square, everyone was dumbfounded. His hands were empty. The coiling dragon spear had been knocked away long ago, stuck in the ruins at the edge of the square. The jade crown on his head was also shattered, and his long hair was disheveled and curly, like a chicken nest on his head. His clothes were ragged, and his entire body was covered with bloody holes and wounds. He was charred black and badly mutilated. His right shoulder was empty. His entire right arm had been blasted into smithereens, and the wound was charred black like charcoal. This kind of injury was really too miserable. Compared to Ji Tianqing, who was not injured at all, the difference was too great. It was clear who won and who lost. Before the fight, Qian Feiyang had arrogantly said that he could easily defeat Ji Tianqing without using any magical treasures or weapons. Ji Tianqing had fought back then. If he did not use any magical treasures or weapons, he would not even be able to last 3 moves and would be beaten down. Now, the two of them had exchanged 3 moves. Qian Feiyang had used his magical treasure, the coiling dragon spear, but he was still defeated by Ji Tianqing's sword. He was seriously injured, and his right arm was chopped off. Not only the geniuses of the 6 nations, even the Great Guardian and the 6 gods' envoys did not expect this result. The difference in strength between the 4th-ranked Qian Feiyang and Ji Tianqing was actually so great. After a few seconds of silence, everyone immediately burst out in exclamations and discussions in disbelief. This is too unbelievable. Ji Tianqing only used 3 moves to defeat Qian Feiyang. If I did not see it with my own eyes, would definitely not believe it. Ji Tianqing at the 5th firmament essence soul realm is actually several times stronger than Qian Feiyang at the 6th firmament. Ji Tianqing defeated Qian Feiyang despite being at a higher level. Furthermore, he only used 3 moves. This is practically a miracle. As expected of the son of the oracle who is favored by the divine master. He is too heaven-defying. After witnessing this miracle with their own eyes, the geniuses of the various nations no longer had any doubts about Ji Tianqing's identity as the son of the oracle. Many geniuses who had been watching coldly from the sidelines were now filled with envy and reverence for him. Those who had mocked and criticized him were so ashamed that their faces flushed red when they recalled what they had said. They wished they could find a hole to hide in. The Great Guardian and the 6 gods' envoys also revealed relieved smiles. After all, Ji Tianqing had crushed Qian Feiyang in an invincible manner to obtain victory. This proved that their judgment was right. Ji Tianqing was the son of the oracle. Just as the crowd was cheering and discussing, Ji Tianqing spoke. He looked at Qian Feiyang expressionlessly and asked, "I said that I would only need 3 moves to defeat you. Are you convinced now?" Qian Feiyang stood in the ruins in tattered clothes. His left hand was clutching his mangled right shoulder as his eyes shimmered with a cold glint. A severed arm could still regrow through recuperation. However, the defeat and humiliation that Ji Tianqing had brought him could never be washed away. He stared intently at Ji Tianqing as he enunciated each word with a hoarse voice. "Ji Tianqing, I admit that you are indeed very strong. However, I will defeat you sooner or later to wash away my humiliation." Ji Tianqing said indifferently, "You have already been defeated by me. What future do you have to talk about? Do you want to wash away your humiliation? You will never have the chance in this lifetime." His tone was very calm, as though he was stating a fact. But in Qian Feiyang's ears, it was incomparably ear-piercing and heart-wrenching. Ji Tianqing's arrogance and contempt came from the bottom of his heart and soul. It was absolutely not intentional. Qian Feiyang could feel that Ji Tianqing did not place him in his sights at all, let alone treat him as an opponent. Just as Ji Tianqing said, he was just a stepping stone. His heart was filled with rage and humiliation, but he could only grit his teeth and forcefully endure it. He silently walked out of the defensive grand array and left the plaza in front of the hall. He was not willing to stay for a second longer and did not want to say a word more either. That would be seeking his own humiliation. In the martial arts world, it was the law of the jungle to begin with. Martial arts cultivation was also 100 barges striving against the current, competing with others, battling with heaven and earth. Every genius, every martial arts powerhouse, would do their best to vie for cultivation resources. Qian Feiyang wanted to rise up and obtain the vast heaven pagoda's high regard and grooming. He naturally had to rack his brains to find opportunities. Previously, Ji Tianqing was a nobody. Qian Feiyang completely disdained to pay attention to him. Currently, Ji Tianqing's limelight was at its peak. If he could trample him underfoot, Qian Feiyang would gain both fame and fortune. His thoughts were beyond criticism. His plan was also very perfect. It was just a pity that he underestimated Ji Tianqing's strength, causing himself to land in a humiliating and wretched state. Chapter 1541. After this battle, Ji Tianqing became famous on the Mount of Canonization. He replaced Qian Feiyang and became the fourth most powerful of the 6 states. None of the geniuses dared to belittle him or talk about him behind his back. Everyone understood that this son of Oracle deserved his title and that he would rise rapidly and become famous in the 6 states. After the battle, Ji Tianqing didn't linger. He left the plaza and went back to the Chamber of Mystical Books. Chief Guardian and the 6 messengers left as well. Only the geniuses from different states stayed in the plaza. They gathered in 2s and 3s and discussed what happened. At the edge of the plaza, Lu Li looked on coldly. A glint of coldness flickered in his eyes. He wanted to use this opportunity to win over Ji Tianqing and even recruit him. However, today, Lu Li became a laughingstock. On the other hand, Ji Tianqing became famous. He became the 4th most popular genius and the son of Oracle. Ji Tianqing's behavior proved that Lu Li's efforts were ineffective. Ji Tianqing didn't take Lu Li seriously at all. The sense of failure and humiliation made Lu Li too ashamed to stay at the Mount of Canonization. He wanted to leave at once. Lu Li looked at Jiang Ningxue and the other geniuses of the Empire of Thousand Snow and said, "The pilgrimage is over. It is not suitable for me to stay at the Mount of Canonization. I will go back to my country soon. Stay at the Mount of Canonization and keep a close eye on Ji Tianqing. Try your best to monitor his every move and find a chance to report to me." The young geniuses nodded. Only Jiang Ningxue seemed to be hesitating. Lu Li looked at her calmly and said, "Shuer, Ji Tianqing is cunning and cunning. You don't have to get close to him in case you get hurt. You just need to cultivate and work hard to improve your abilities. I will go back and report to my father. I will find a way to deal with him." Jiang Ningxue immediately let out a sigh of relief. She nodded and said, "Shuer will remember your highness' order. I won't let you down." Lu Li couldn't help but frown when he heard these words that sounded a little distant. He stared at Jiang Ningxue and observed her for a while. Then, he noticed something. In the past, Jiang Ningxue was deeply in love with him. When she looked at him, her eyes were always filled with tenderness and shyness. But now, Jiang Ningxue's eyes were calm and cold, without a trace of affection. How shrewd was Lu Li! He understood that Jiang Ningxue was still angry about what had happened before. Her affection for him had faded a lot. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but send a voice transmission to her. Shuai, don't take what happened before to heart. I couldn't disobey the emperor's orders and had no other choice. Jiang Ningxue didn't appreciate it. She cupped her hands and saluted him. With a cold expression, she said, Your Highness, you worry too much. As a citizen of the Thousand Snow Empire, Shuai should serve the country. Lu Li frowned. He wanted to say something more, but he didn't know where to start. In the end, he could only sigh silently and leave the square with Manager Fang, the maids, and the guards. Not long afterward, Lu Li left the Mount of Investiture with the guards of honor in great numbers. Jiang Ningxue went back to the Palace of Thousand Snow. Sitting alone in the secret chamber, she was restless and could not calm down. Her mind was in a mess. Various pictures kept popping up in her mind. Lu Li used a honey trap to force her to get close to Ji Tianqing. She also saw Ji Tianqing walking around the garden with her and having a heart-to-heart talk with her. More than that, she saw how Ji Tianqing crushed the talents of the Chu Yun Empire and Qian Feiyang in a domineering manner. For some reason, Ji Tianqing's handsome and upright figure, his imposing manner and manner of looking down at the world, were deeply engraved in her mind. She could not erase them. In the depth of her mind, she even had a strange idea. Lu Li is much weaker than Ji Tianqing in terms of tactics, means, abilities, and behavior. Their imposing manner and manners are incomparable. I love Lu Li deeply. But for the order of the Holy Emperor, in order to realize his ambition and hegemony, he is willing to sacrifice me to Ji Tianqing. In comparison with Ji Tianqing's style of doing things, he would never push his woman into another man's arms. After this incident, Jiang Ningxue was deeply disappointed in Lu Li. But for Ji Tianqing, she developed some feelings and admiration. As soon as Ji Tianqing returned to the Chamber of Divine Books, he saw a second guardian waiting for him at the door. Have you been serving Lu Li well these days at the Hall of Tranquility? Second guardian looked at him indifferently and asked in a low voice. Ji Tianqing paused for a moment. He glanced at her and nodded expressionlessly. The coldness in Second Protector's eyes softened a bit. He advised Lu Li earnestly, even though you are not ambitious and you are not talented enough, you must know how to judge the situation. If you can gain Lu Li's favor and guidance, you will benefit a lot. If you continue to muddle along like this, you will not be able to pass the test in a few months. By then, not only will you not be able to become a disciple, you will also fail to live up to His Highness' cultivation. Ji Tianqing said calmly, If there is nothing else, I will take my leave now. Seeing that Lu Li did not listen to her advice and was even impatient, Second Guardian frowned with displeasure. Her eyes became cold and dignified again. Truly, rotten wood can't be carved. How disappointing. Let me ask you, did the worship ceremony go well? Ji Tianqing did not want to say more. He gave a brief answer, everything went well. Lu Li has left. Second Guardian nodded, waved her hand and said, Then you can leave now. I will call you if I need you. Ji Tianqing turned around and went back to the secret chamber. The Second Protector looked at his back as he left. His eyes flashed with disappointment as he muttered to himself, What an ungrateful fellow. I really don't know how a guy like him, who has neither talent nor ambition, can get His Highness care. With that said, she shook her head and disappeared into the darkness. Ji Tianqing went back to the secret chamber. He quietly channeled his energy to regulate his breathing and recover his consumed mana. 6 hours later, it was evening. His mana was fully recovered, so he ended his cultivation. At this time, a young man's voice came from outside the secret chamber. Young Master Ji, can you show yourself? When Ji Tianqing heard this familiar voice, he stood up and walked out of the secret chamber. At the door stood a young man in a white robe. He was more beautiful than a girl. It was Endless Void Een. Why are you here? Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked. Endless Void Yin smiled and explained, even though I cannot enter the Divine Book Pavilion without permission, I am only here to visit you. I am not here to read the books. I am here to see you and congratulate you. After today, you will be the most dazzling talent of the Mount of Gods. You have overshadowed the other 3 geniuses. Your future is limitless. Ji Tianqing did not try to be humble. He just nodded with a smile. Endless Void Yin continued, also, I am here to remind you of something. Today, you taught all the geniuses of the Chu Yun Empire a lesson. Chapter 1542. Yin Wu Kei's reminder warmed Ji Tianqing's heart. He smiled and nodded, thank you for your reminder. I know what I'm doing. No matter how much the Chu Yun Empire hates me, they wouldn't go so far as to kill me at Mount God Bestowment, right? Yin Wu Kei smiled and shook his head, they wouldn't go that far. Not to mention the powers behind Lan Yiqing and Kuang Long, even the Chu Yun Saint Emperor wouldn't cause trouble at Mount God Bestowment. However, you won't be able to stay at Mount God Bestowment forever. Once you leave Mount God Bestowment, you'll be in danger. Ji Tianqing nodded and said calmly, let's talk about the future in the future. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. You, on the other hand, are the only friend I can trust. Thank you for your concern and reminder. Hearing this, Yin Wu Kei's body trembled. He was obviously stunned. Soon after, a smile appeared on his beautiful face. He asked excitedly, young Master Ji, you're willing to be friends with me? You're willing to accept me? Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. After receiving his confirmation, Yin Wu Kei became even more excited. He was so excited that his eyes shone brightly. That's great. I knew that you'd be moved by my sincerity sooner or later. Ji Tianqing thought for a while, then took out a jade slip from his interspatial ring and handed it to Yin Wu Quebec. This jade slip is for you. Take it as a gift for our first meeting. You actually prepared a gift for me? Yin Wu Kei was so happy that his eyes narrowed. He quickly took the jade slip and looked at it. He asked curiously, young Master Ji, what is this jade slip? Ji Tianqing said calmly, previously, I saw that you used the yin-yang umbrella as your natal magic treasure. There seemed to be some problems with your cultivation technique, causing you to be shackled. Your strength hasn't improved for a long time. Yin Wu Kei's eyes widened in disbelief. He asked in shock, young Master Ji, you can even see that? The cultivation technique I'm cultivating is a divine cultivation technique passed down in my Flower Moon Palace. It's a pity that every disciple who cultivates this cultivation technique will encounter the same shackles and obstacles. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, so, I found a limitless yin-yang and gave it to you. This cultivation method is most suitable for you to cultivate. It's definitely not any weaker than the cultivation methods of your Flower Moon Palace. However, the content of the technique is somewhat obscure and difficult to understand. It is a very ancient secret technique. It may be difficult for you to practice it at the beginning. But if you persevere in your cultivation, with your talent and comprehension, I believe you will soon see results. Our Flower Moon Palace's ancestral divine art is a high-grade tribulation level technique. Yin Wu Kei was astonished. He thought to himself, could the yin-yang limitless art that Mr. Ji gave me be a tribulation level divine art? As soon as he thought of this, he hurriedly handed the jade slip back to Ji Tianqing. Young Master Ji, this is a supreme-grade tribulation level cultivation technique. It's a priceless divine technique. I can't accept such a valuable gift. Ji Tianqing was startled. He did not expect that Yin Wu Kei would not accept such a precious technique. He wanted to laugh in his heart and thought, a supreme-grade tribulation-level divine art is indeed a priceless treasure. In the divine library, only God disciples have the right to borrow it. Just this, and Yin Wuke does not dare to accept it. If he knew that this cultivation technique is not a tribulation-level technique, but a true saint-level technique, I wonder what he would think? This, Yin-Yang limitless art, was a cultivation technique that he had specially chosen for Yin Wu Quebec. In the Divine Library, there were tens of thousands of ancient books that Kenshin had collected. Among them, there were more than 30,000 different divine arts and secret techniques. The worst of them was a saint-level technique, and there were many god-level techniques. Because of this, the Divine Library of the Clear Sky Pagoda was not worth mentioning in his eyes. The cultivation techniques and secret techniques that were stored there were all trash. He looked at Yin Wuke and said seriously, I have no reason to take back the gift that I have given you. If you don't want to accept this cultivation technique, then I will take it back. There is no need for us to be friends. As he said that, he stretched out his hand to take the jade bamboo scroll. Yin Wuke's expression changed. With a whoosh, he kept the jade bamboo scroll into his interspatial ring. He laughed awkwardly and said, Young Master Ji, why are you always so overbearing? Ji Tianqing frowned slightly. He thought about it seriously and said sincerely, maybe it is because I am more handsome? Yin Wuke was speechless. He rolled his eyes at Ji Yunshu. Young Master Ji, I will accept your gift. I will work hard in my cultivation and will not disappoint you. He clasped his hands at Ji Tianqing and said goodbye with a smile. Ji Tianqing nodded and watched as Yin Wuke turned and left. After Yin Wuke left, Ji Yunshu returned to the secret room and continued to cultivate. After the oracle and the public challenge, Ji Tianqing had become the most famous person on Mount God Bestowment. He wanted to cultivate quietly in the Divine Library and try his best to break through to the 6th level of the primordial spirit realm. However, the Divine Library was not destined to be peaceful. Early the next morning, Lin Daoi quickly ascended the Clear Sky Pagoda and arrived at the Divine Library. Just as he entered the Divine Book Pavilion, a black figure appeared out of thin air in front of him, blocking his path. Lin Daoi, what are you doing here at the Divine Library? Hearing the hoarse voice, Lin Daoi raised his head to look at the black figure. He saw the black-robed second protector staring at him coldly. He clasped his hands at the second protector and explained, Greetings, second protector. I am here at the Divine Library on the orders of the Great Protector to find Ji Tianqing. The second protector frowned. His murky eyes flashed with anger. He shouted, what did that kid do wrong again? Did he offend Luli in the Hall of Tranquility? This sentence stunned Lin Daoi. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. He stared at the second protector with a strange expression. What are you talking about, second protector? Ji Tianqing is a peerless genius. It is not a big deal to offend Luli. What is there to offend? The second protector confirmed his guess. He said coldly, humph. What peerless genius? He is just a blockhead. This kid is really unrepentant. Instead of serving Luli well, he dares to offend him. Lin Daoi, report to the second protector later. Ask him to punish Ji Tianqing severely. Teach this kid a painful lesson. Seeing the anger between the second protector's eyebrows, Lin Daoi's expression became even more strange. Second protector, you should tell the great protector about this matter yourself. I am just following orders. Excuse me. With that, he ignored the second protector and walked toward Ji Tianqing's secret chamber. The second protector was confused. He felt that Lin Daoi was acting strange, so he followed him. After a while, Lin Daoi came to the door of the secret chamber and shouted seriously, Ji Tianqing, I am Lin Daoi. I have something to ask of you. The second protector frowned and sneered, you don't have to be so polite to a punished criminal. Chapter 1543. Second Guardian's tone was impatient and his attitude was cold. Lin Daoi felt something was wrong and frowned. But his status was one level lower than second guardian, so he could not say anything. They waited for a while before the stone door of the secret chamber was opened. Ji Tianqing walked out. He glanced at second guardian with a straight face and asked, "What is it?" Second protector glared at him coldly and shouted, "Yesterday, I asked you if you were serving Lu Li well. How dare you lie to me? I was right about you, rotten wood. You didn't disappoint me. Oracle Lin is here on the order of the Great Guardian. What have you done? Accept your punishment." Ji Tianqing frowned. He looked at Second Guardian indifferently and asked, "Second Guardian, I don't think I have offended you. How dare you?" Second Guardian sneered with disdain. "What is your relationship with Lu Li? Is he your son?" Ji Tianqing asked again. Second Guardian frowned and scolded in a deep voice, "Bastard. Don't talk nonsense." Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a cold smile. "If that's not the case, then why are you protecting him?" Second Guardian sneered and said, "Lu Li is humble and polite. He is talented. He is diligent in cultivation, he is such a talented disciple. If I don't protect him, am I supposed to protect you, rotten wood?" When Lin Daoi saw that the two of them were about to quarrel, he hurriedly stepped in to mediate the situation. "Cough, cough, please don't be angry. I am here for Ji Tianqing. Please let me get down to business." Only then did Second Guardian stop. He did not want to talk to Ji Tianqing anymore. Ji Tianqing did not want to talk to her either. He looked at Lin Daoi and asked, "Oracle Lin, what is it?" Lin Daoi cupped his hands toward him and quickly said, "Ji Tianqing, the Great Guardian and several divine envoys have discussed and decided to revoke your punishment. From today onwards, you don't have to stay in the Divine Book Pavilion to clean. You can leave." Ji Tianqing looked at him expressionlessly and said in an indifferent tone, "No need. I feel that the Divine Book Pavilion is quite good. It is quiet here and very suitable for my cultivation." Lin Daoi wasn't surprised by his reaction at all. Instead, he looked worried. "Tianqing, I know that the Grand Guardian's punishment of you has indeed caused you to be wronged and your reputation to be tarnished. But you don't have to take it to heart. The Great Protector isn't targeting you. He's just handling things impartially. Now that the Great Guardian has revoked your punishment and given you a way out, why don't you take a step back as well? This is good for everyone." Ji Tianqing shook his head and said indifferently, "Oracle Lin, you've misunderstood. I'm used to living in the Divine Book Pavilion. I really don't want to leave." Sigh. Lin Daoi sighed helplessly and said with a bitter smile, "Ji Tianqing, I understand your personality. Why do you have to do this? It won't be good for anyone if things get ugly." Ji Tianqing couldn't be bothered to explain. He stretched out his hand and said, "Please go back." Lin Daoi knew that he couldn't persuade him. He could only turn and leave to report to the Great Guardian. The Second Guardian stood at the side and witnessed the entire process. She looked at the departing Lin Daoi and frowned at Ji Tianqing. A trace of confusion flashed across her eyes. What's going on with these two guys? Why did the Great Guardian revoke his punishment for no reason? Didn't he make a mistake and get punished by the Great Guardian? She wanted to ask Ji Tianqing what was going on, but Ji Tianqing didn't. Unfortunately, Ji Tianqing didn't even look at her. He turned and returned to the secret chamber and closed the stone door. She could only suppress her confusion and turn to leave. At the peak of Mount God, in a magnificent palace. In a spacious and bright study, the Great Guardian stood in front of the window and looked at the sea of clouds outside. He was thinking about something. At this moment, footsteps were heard at the door. A middle-aged man in a purple robe walked quickly into the study. The Great Guardian quickly turned and looked at the man in the purple robe. He asked with a dignified expression, "Lin Daoi, have you delivered my message? Lin Daoi nodded. He looked a little hesitant, as if he wanted to say something. The Great Guardian glanced at him and frowned in confusion. He asked, "Where's Ji Tianqing? Why didn't you bring him here?" Lin Daoi had to tell the truth. He cupped his hands and reported, "Great Guardian, I've delivered your message. However, Ji Tianqing said that he's used to living in the Divine Book Pavilion. It's quiet and more suitable for cultivation. He doesn't want to leave." The Great Guardian's white eyebrows were tightly knitted. He looked both angry and amused. This bastard is still angry with me because of what happened before. If he doesn't want to leave, do you want me to invite him personally? Lin Daoi was also full of worry. He reminded in a low voice, "Great Guardian, His Highness protected Ji Tianqing. Now, Ji Tianqing has gained the Divine Master's favor and become the Son of God. We must nurture him with all our strength. Otherwise, no one can bear the blame when the Divine Master blames us. The truth is that the worship ceremony was a misunderstanding. We can't let the Son of God bear the blame and continue to be punished in the Divine Book Pavilion." The Great Guardian nodded solemnly. "Of course, I understand this logic. Speaking of that incident, I didn't deliberately target him. It's just that I've always been strict in enforcing the law and will never allow anyone to offend the Divine Master's dignity. If I don't punish him severely, many followers will follow suit and it will definitely affect the Divine Master's prestige. It's probably because I personally punished him and whipped him in front of everyone. That's why he has complaints in his heart." The Great Guardian also realized that his methods back then were a little too harsh and overboard. After thinking for a while, he finally made up his mind. He waved his sleeves and said in a low voice, "Fine, since he doesn't want to take advantage of this situation, I'll go to the Divine Book Pavilion personally to invite him. Also, Lin Daoi, bring some people to tidy up the Heaven Saint Palace. Make sure it's properly tidied up and wait for Ji Tianqing to move in." With that, the Great Guardian was about to leave the study. Lin Daoi was stunned for a moment. He asked in disbelief, "Great Guardian, you're really going to invite him personally? If this matter gets out, I'm afraid it'll affect your prestige." The Great Guardian smiled nonchalantly and waved his hand. "I was once the Son of God, the Divine Master personally appointed me as the Great Guardian of the Tower. Who dares to criticize me? Moreover, I have always been impartial, and strict. Right is right, and wrong is wrong. Since I've misunderstood him and done something wrong, it's only right for me to apologize to him." After hearing his words, Lin Daoi was instantly filled with respect. He said sincerely, "The Great Guardian is indeed noble and magnanimous. You're truly a role model for our generation." The Great Guardian shook his head and said in a low voice, "You don't have to flatter me. I'm not as magnanimous as you make me out to be. The main reason is because Ji Tianqing has obtained the Divine Master's favor. He's the Son of God, the pride of the future. That's why I can treat him like this." Chapter 1544. At the Chamber of Divine Books. In a dark corner by the door, Second Guardian was resting on a jade chair with her eyes closed. On the surface, she looked like she was taking a nap. In fact, she was silently practicing a special kind of martial art. All of a sudden, heavy footsteps came from the door. A burly, white-haired elder in a silver robe stepped into the Divine Book Pavilion. Hearing the sound, Second Guardian opened her eyes at once. When she saw the man's face, she was confused. She hurried to greet him. "Great Guardian, why are you here at the Chamber of Divine Books?" It was the Great Guardian. He glanced at Second Guardian and then looked around. Calmly, he said, "I am here at the Chamber of Divine Books for business." Second Guardian thought to herself. Usually, if there was nothing important, Great Guardian would not come here even once in a few years. Not long after Lin Daoi left, Great Guardian came. This was too much of a coincidence. Therefore, she asked tentatively, "Are you here for Ji Tianqing?" Great Guardian did not hide anything. He nodded and said, "Yes." "Where does he live?" "Take me to him. It's in the secret room over there." Second Protector hurriedly led him to Ji Tianqing's secret room. On the way, she could not help but ask, "Great Guardian, what did Ji Tianqing do to make you come to him in person?" "Made a mistake?" The Great Guardian frowned and glanced at her with a strange expression. Second Guardian did not notice anything wrong. She continued to ask, "Did Ji Tianqing offend Lu Li?" "I have seen it. This guy is not ambitious and he is not talented. We gave him a chance to improve but he did not know how to take advantage of it. He even dared to offend Lu Li. This guy is such a blockhead." Great Guardian listened to her nagging. His expression became strange. He asked in a low voice, "Second Guardian, do you have some misunderstanding about Ji Tianqing? Lu Li is good but how can he be compared with Ji Tianqing?" The Second Guardian's body stiffened and his eyes were filled with doubt. "Great Guardian, aren't you saying the wrong thing? How could a piece of rotten wood like Ji Tianqing compare with Lu Li? Back then, I was not the only one who thought highly of Lu Li. Didn't you also think highly of him and tried your best to cultivate him?" The corners of the Great Protector's mouth twitched involuntarily, and his expression became increasingly strange. He wanted to explain, but when he reached the door of the secret chamber, he shouted, "Ji Tianqing, I have something to tell you. Come out and meet me." A majestic and vigorous voice passed through the stone door and into the secret room. After saying that, the Great Protector stood outside the door and waited quietly. The Second Guardian had some doubts in his heart. So, he stood to the side and watched coldly. After a while, the stone door of the secret chamber opened, and Ji Tianqing slowly walked out. "I only want to cultivate peacefully in the Divine Book Pavilion, but you guys keep disturbing my cultivation time and time again." He frowned slightly, as if he was unhappy that his cultivation was interrupted. Seeing him like this, the Second Guardian glared at him and scolded, "Ji Tianqing, don't be rude. The Great Protector is here in person. Why don't you salute and admit your guilt?" Before Ji Tianqing could say anything, the Great Protector glanced at her and said in a deep voice, "Second Guardian, this has nothing to do with you. Don't talk too much." The Second Guardian was stunned for a moment. A glint of shame and anger flashed through her eyes. She never expected that the Great Protector would not save her face and scold her in front of Ji Tianqing. However, it was inappropriate for her to argue with the Great Protector. She had to suppress her shame and anger and looked at Ji Tianqing coldly. The Great Protector looked at Ji Tianqing seriously and said in a solemn tone, "Ji Tianqing, I have come here in person for two things. First, the matter of the worship ceremony was due to my negligence. I made an arbitrary conclusion, which led to the misunderstanding. Regarding this matter, I would like to apologize to you in person. I hope you won't take it to heart." After he finished speaking, he formally raised his palms and cupped his hands towards Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing looked at him calmly and did not say anything. However, the coldness in his eyes faded a lot. The Second Guardian was watching from the side. She was dumbfounded and her eyes were wide open. What's going on? Great Protector, why are you apologizing to him? You even saluted him. What does this kid do to deserve your apology? The Second Guardian's tone was full of shock and confusion. Her calm state of mind was messed up on the spot. However, the Great Protector did not explain at all. He turned to glare at her and shouted in a deep voice, "Second Guardian, please be quiet. Don't disturb my business." After being scolded again, the Second Guardian seemed to wake up from a dream and quickly shut her mouth. However, the shock and confusion in her heart were about to explode. If she had not seen it with her own eyes, she would never believe that the Great Protector would salute and apologize to someone who had committed a crime. The most important thing was that this person who had committed a crime was of low status, low aptitude, and a blockhead who did not want to improve himself. At this time, the Great Protector said to Ji Tianqing, "Second, I have decided to revoke your punishment. You don't need to stay in the Divine Book Pavilion anymore. I know that you need a quiet place to cultivate. Therefore, I have sent people to clean up the Heaven Saint Palace. In the future, that will be your cave abode. You can move there to live and cultivate." Hearing this, the second guardian was dumbfounded again. His light green eyes widened, revealing a look of deep astonishment. She could not believe that the Great Protector valued and protected Ji Tianqing so much that he had bestowed the Heaven Saint Palace to him as his cave abode. The Heaven Saint Palace was located at the peak of God Bestowment Mountain. Among the many palaces, it was the palace with the most abundant spiritual energy. It was the most suitable place for cultivation. Furthermore, one could occasionally receive divine light from the God Nation, which could greatly increase one's strength. It was not an exaggeration to say that not only did all the God disciples dream of living in the Heaven Saint Palace, but even the God envoys and the Great Protectors wanted to live there. However, the Heaven Saint Palace had always been empty. No one lived there. Only the children of God who were favored by the God Master, or the God Master's sons and princesses, were qualified to live there. The second guardian could not understand why the Great Protector had bestowed the Heaven Saint Palace to Ji Tianqing. Why? Was the Great Protector crazy? Incomparable confusion and shock caused her hands, which were hidden in her sleeves, to tremble uncontrollably. However, she could only endure it. She did her best to endure and did not dare to interrupt the Great Protector. In fact, Ji Tianqing did not bear a grudge against the Great Protector. In the past 2 months, he had already understood that the Great Protector was a fair and impartial person. He was very strict in handling matters. If there was a grudge in his heart, it was because the Great Protector had sentenced him to 70 lashes. This punishment was too harsh. However, the Great Protector had personally come to the Divine Book Pavilion to invite him. He had even bowed and apologized in person. This showed that he was very sincere. In addition, the Great Protector had revoked his punishment and had even bestowed the Heaven Saint Palace to him as his cave abode. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.